Chapter 530. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the flight from Reki City to Lin, and finally landed smoothly at Lin, an international airport after being delayed for 2 hours. The announcer's voice echoed in the cabin. But the first-class cabin, which was filled with a touch of natural fragrance, was quiet. Several passengers were staring at a seat by the window, intentionally or unintentionally. Both men and women had complicated looks in their eyes. That was the most beautiful scenery in the whole plane. That natural and rich body fragrance came from here. On the journey from Eastern Europe to Jianghu State, everyone in the first-class cabin seemed to be immersed in this intoxicating fragrance and could not extricate themselves. She wore black high heels, simple tight black trousers, and a loose white shirt. She opened her eyes an hour before the plane landed. Under the somewhat unnatural smile of the stewardess, she asked for a glass of water and drank it. Until the plane landed, her eyes were still a little dazed and lazy. She was a real beauty. People had many definitions of beauty. But all definitions seemed to be vulnerable to a single blow when applied to her. Elegant, quiet, exquisite and languid. Clear and cold, dreamy and illusory, perfect and flawless. Her every movement seemed to carry a kind of calm and beautiful grace. She was devastatingly beautiful and peerless. The seat next to the woman was originally occupied by an old man from Eastern Europe who came to Jianghu State to travel. But this seat, which countless people yearned for, was bought by a high-spirited middle-aged man who was full of success. He offered $20,000, and the transaction process was extremely smooth. But from the takeoff to the landing of the plane, for nearly 24 hours, he who was sitting next to the beauty did not dare to say a word. It was not that he did not want to. He wanted to, but he did not dare to. The plane finally stopped. The middle-aged man, who had already made a name for himself in a certain field of the domestic business world, finally could not help but say slowly, "Miss, please?" His voice was extremely rough and hoarse, with a strong sense of guilt. The woman turned her head and glanced at him. Her eyes were bright and resplendent, like the stars in the night sky. The man suddenly swallowed all his words and coughed awkwardly. "I'm married," the woman said softly. Her voice was clear and cold, with a kind of indifference that kept people 1,000 miles away. "I love my husband very much." After a pause, she continued, "Thank you." The middle-aged man's face flushed red. He stood up in a sorry state and gave way. He stood there in a daze. The woman stood up and walked over. She didn't have any luggage. She just carried a coat in her hand that couldn't be found in Lin, and then got off the plane lightly. In the airport, countless stunned gazes gathered on the woman. The noisy crowd gradually quietened down. The woman walked forward alone, calmly walking into the VIP passage. The air distorted for a moment. The woman's figure walked into the corner of the passage and instantly disappeared. A few men who had subconsciously followed her were stunned. They looked left and right and stood where they were, feeling lost. The woman continued walking forward. A figure shrouded in a black cloak took the coat from her hands and followed behind her without a word. A faintly discernible but extremely condensed power spread into the surroundings, completely enveloping him and the woman's figures. The two figures instantly disappeared before everyone's eyes. How about Saint? The woman glanced at the man in black beside her. The laziness in her eyes faded bit by bit, and she became the goddess of the dark world again. It was military counselor who came to pick them up. Hearing the boss's question, he shook his head slightly. "We just met. He's not prepared, so it's hard for him to make a breakthrough in the near future." Qin Weibai paused as if she was thinking about something. "There will be a rainbow above Westlake tonight. It's very beautiful," she suddenly said. Saint froze for a moment and then understood that this should be what Qin Weibai wanted him to convey to Saint. He nodded and took out his mobile phone. The two of them walked forward at a moderate pace. Military counselor sent the text message and continued to report, "Boss, the high-level officials of Jianghu State have confirmed the new vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps, Jianghu. And I received the news today that Jianghu broke through overnight." "What realm is he in now?" Qin Weibai asked carelessly. "The peak of the half-step invincible realm. He has the combat capability of the invincible realm. He can be called His Highness." Military counselor took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. Qin Weibai suddenly stopped where she was. This was impossible news. But she didn't say it was impossible. She just kept silent for a long time. Before the final maneuver, Jianghu was only at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. He broke through the day before the final maneuver and directly entered the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm. Then he lowered his realm in the final maneuver and retreated to the initial stage of the thunder-shocking realm. But now Jiang Shangyu, whom military counselor described, could already be called His Highness. Thunder-shocking realm. The stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The half-step invincible realm. The top of the half-step invincible realm. The combat capability of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu had crossed 6 thresholds overnight. And all of them were thresholds that could trap ordinary geniuses for a lifetime. No one can do this, Qin Weibai said slowly. This was completely impossible. He kept breaking through realms overnight. If martial arts were so easy to break through, why were invincible realm experts so rare? In the entire dark world there were even a few experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Jiang Shangyu's performance was no longer something that could be explained by the so-called talent and his own path. This was a real step to the sky, even more exaggerated than his current position. There's only one explanation. Qin Weibai continued. But before she finished speaking, military counselor had already shook his head. This is impossible. No matter how talented he was, it was impossible to cross a whole big realm overnight. Even immortals could not do it. The only possibility was that Jiang Shangyu was not breaking through the realm last night. If it was not breaking through the realm, what could it be? Qin Weibai glanced at military counselor and said calmly, "You should know that nothing is impossible." Military counselor followed Qin Weibai with a bitter smile and continued, "There's one more thing. When the situation was the most tense last night, Minister Dongqing issued several secret orders. The Yuzhou garrison, artillery, armed police, Navy and Air Force all took action which had a far-reaching impact. Minister Dongqing was under a lot of pressure. Boss, should we show up?" Minister Dongqing. The smile on Qin Weibai's lips flashed away and then she whispered, "At present, what's the best and worst result?" When Dongqing Wudi issued the secret order last night, she was still on the plane, but it was not difficult to imagine that scene. That was the most powerful deterrent to the Wang family of Beihai and the craziest counterattack. But Dongqing Wudi's move also touched the bottom line of the major groups in Zhongzhou state. No one denied that the Dongqing clan was the most powerful family in the military of Zhongzhou state. But the army was the sharp weapon of the country, not the private army of the Dongqing clan. Last night's movement was bound to arouse the vigilance of the major groups. It was impossible for the Dongqing clan not to pay a price. It's still impossible to judge at present, but a deputy commander of the garrison has been dismissed on the spot for investigation last night. That deputy commander has always been the confidant of Minister Dongqing. In the morning, the General Political Department has sent investigation teams to the armed police and artillery units. In addition, I heard that the Navy headquarters has been changing recently. This was undoubtedly the toughest purge. The major groups seem to have reached an agreement to use the most direct means to weaken Dongqing Wudi's influence in the military. However, Dongqing Wudi could not say anything at this time. In this situation, even President Li Huaqing's attitude would be very subtle. This was naked politics. Except for the giant group, no one wanted to see a military giant who could set off a mutiny at any time. Do something. Qin Weibai thought for a moment and said calmly, "The giant group will be the foundation of Tianlan in the future. This big tree can't fall." Understood. Military counselor nodded. To what extent? It's up to you. As Qin Weibai spoke, she walked out of the airport. It was dusk outside the airport. The clouds all over the sky seemed to be burning in the light of the setting sun, and the world was fiery red. A very luxurious car stopped in front of the door. Seeing Qin Weibai and military counselor coming out, 2 strong guards next to the car bowed and opened the door. Qin Weibai sat down in the back row of the car and looked at the decoration of the spacious back row space. A strange emotion flashed across her perfect and dreamy face. Military counselor was a little embarrassed and innocent. He coughed and thought, "This has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me." He rubbed his hands and did not know what the boss was thinking. He was more afraid of being blamed, so he took the initiative and said awkwardly, "Boss, do you want to eat something first?" "I'm not hungry," Qin Weibai said faintly. She was still looking at the interior of the car, and no one knew what she was thinking. Military counselor's heart sank slightly, and he smelled a trace of jealousy for no reason. "I don't like this car," Qin Weibai said casually, "let's change it." Okay. Military counselor smiled bitterly and said without hesitation. Qin Weibai did not speak and quietly looked at the scenery outside the window. "Shall we go to St.?" Military counselor said cautiously. "Go to the supervisory council." Qin Weibai said softly, "Communicate with Governor Zhou Yuanshan and temporarily seal Westlake tonight." After the Yuzhou conference, Zhou Yuanshan, the former top leader of Luojing in Zhongyuan, had been transferred to Lin, and as the acting governor. He accepted the team of Wu Jingmin, the founding member of the Li family. Now, although he was the acting governor, he was majestic and could be said to be a man of great authority in Lin'an. However, to seal West Lake? West Lake was huge. Zhou Yuanshan could do this, but wouldn't it be too noisy to mobilize manpower and material resources? Boss, are you going to the supervisory council too? Military counselor asked tentatively. Invite the sword. Qin Weibai said calmly, the core of the 13th floor is in the supervisory council. She paused and continued, it has always been in the supervisory council. The 13th floor. Military counselor's face suddenly changed. He thought of the situation in Eastern Europe and couldn't help but say, the situation in Eastern Europe has reached this point? Qin Weibai didn't say much. She just gave a simple Chapter 531. When they approached the supervisory council, military counselor, who had been silent for most of the way, said with a bitter smile, Boss, I think it's still too urgent. No one knew what she was thinking about. After hearing the military counselor's words, she shook her head after a while. Now is the right time. Tianlan's body is too perfect. Although he is seriously injured now, it won't take long for him to recover. While he is weak, we can take care of everything. Her tone was ordinary, but it was extremely determined. Military counselor's heart became more and more bitter. He shook his head and whispered, if His Highness doesn't participate in the final decisive battle. Qin Weibai reached out and tucked her hair behind her ear. She showed a satisfied smile and said softly, he has done everything he can. Next is my business. Military counselor was silent. At this point in the chaos in Eastern Europe, no one could turn the tables. The divine and holy lists were fragmented, and the dark world was in turmoil. The few remaining superpowers had reasons not to retreat. The plan that Samsara Palace had been brewing for many years had many accidents in the middle, but the general trend had never deviated from the beginning to the end. With the whole dark world as a chess game, all the killing moves were concentrated in Eastern Europe. When Samsara Palace had never thought about winning. This plan had been officially started in the decisive Battle of Heaven capital more than 3 years ago, but it had been brewing in secret for a longer time. All the preparations, all the efforts, and all the killing had only one goal. It was not to win. It was to self-destruct. From the very beginning, Qin Weibai had wanted to drag Samsara Palace to perish with the whole dark world. Next was Samsara Palace's business. But it was also Qin Weibai's business. Military counselor turned to look at Qin Weibai. She opened the window with her slender and white fingers. The evening wind blew into the carriage. Her hair fluttered gently and her fragrance floated. She was as beautiful as a grand and illusory dream. Saint has no hope of breaking through in the near future. My injury has improved, but it's difficult for me to exert my full strength. Even if the core is intact, how can the boss reproduce the 13th floor? His voice was low and hoarse. Among the 12 super masters of Samsara, he and Saint might not be the strongest, but they were definitely one of the top combat forces. Moreover, they were also at the top of the hierarchy, so they naturally knew the plan that Qin Weibai had been brewing for many years. The end of the plan could be seen from the beginning. So it had a firm name. Final Day. Ending an era with the power of a single sword. Since the situation had developed to this extent, the Samsara Palace had already made all the preliminary preparations, and there was no need to plan anything next. The most important part of the Armageddon plan was to drag all the dark forces into this mess. There were countless details hidden in this step, and it had been completed long ago. Therefore, the next most important thing was that sword. A sword that could end an entire era. Naturally, it was the sword of the Chosen One. Furthermore, it was the strongest sword strike of a prodigy at his peak. That would be the true pinnacle and end of martial arts. It would be the strongest sword since the beginning of martial arts. Perhaps some people could stand shoulder to shoulder with it, but they would never be able to surpass it. However, there were no geniuses in this era. How could it be easy to replicate the pinnacle sword of a prodigy? The 12 super masters of Samsara Palace couldn't do that. Therefore, a long time ago, Qin Weibai began to prepare for the 13th floor. 13-story pagoda was not a sword. It was a formation. It could even be said to be the highest standard sword formation in the Dark World. It was also the start of that sword. 13 half-step invincible realm masters. Military counselor shook his head with a bitter smile. This was the plan to isolate him from Saint from the very beginning. But where could Qin Weibai find 13 half-step invincible realm masters to form the sword formation of the 13th floor? The Qin clan has two and it was planned many years ago. Qin Weibai said calmly, the Lin clan can send 3. As for Sai City, Governor Situ is seriously injured, but he still has the power for one sword strike. Our Samsara Palace has secretly trained 2 in the past 2 years. Although they also only have the power for one sword strike, it's enough. Military Counselor calculated the numbers silently. Qin Weibai's eyes looked at the Supervisory Council that was getting closer and closer. She said blandly, the Li family must lend me 2 half-step invincible realm masters. Li Honghe can provide this lineup. The Dongqing clan also has 1. Military Counselor frowned. There are 2 more. If he and Saint were counted, there were 13 half-step invincible realm masters to form the 13th floor. Everything was just right. Qin Weibai glanced at him and said calmly, the other 2 are from the new stream. The new stream. Military Counselor trembled slightly. He thought silently, are we going to reveal all our trump cards? It's time. Qin Weibai said. Military Counselor nodded in silence, then shook his head and finally remained silent. The figures of the Zhongzhou State Army and armed police had appeared in front of them. Groups of people in camouflage uniforms kept shuttling through West Lake, completely blocking it as fast as they could. On the only way to the Supervisory Council, the number 1 car of the Jianghu provincial government was parked there openly. Zhou Yuanshan, the governor of Jianghu who personally ordered to block the entire West Lake, stood beside the car. Seeing Military Counselor's car, he waved his hand. Stop the car. Qin Weibai said. The black car slowly stopped beside Zhou Yuanshan. Qin Weibai and Military Counselor walked out. Hello, Boss Qin. Zhou Yuanshan greeted him with a smile and shook hands with Military Counselor. Military Counselor looked at him seriously and was convinced. Last night, the hidden mutiny in Yuzhou brought unimaginable pressure to Dongqing Wudi. The whole giant group was now in a storm. At this time, all the major groups had reasons to kill the giant group. Under the storm, with the appetite of the major groups, it was not as simple as taking down a few generals. As the next leader of the giant group, Zhou Yuanshan was definitely likely to become the focus of the major group's firepower. But at this time, the governor was still smiling and blocked West Lake without saying anything. He deserved to be one of the candidates most likely to reach the top 20 years later. Such courage and temperament were really at the peak. I'm sorry to trouble you, brother-in-law. Qin Weibai chuckled and said, don't worry. Military Counselor will do something next. There won't be a big problem at home. A strange look flashed in Zhou Yuanshan's eyes. Dongqing Qiuqi was his wife, Dongqing Rushi was his sister-in-law, and his sister-in-law was Li Tianlan's fiancée. Qin Weibai was Li Tianlan's woman. It was okay for Li Tianlan to call him brother-in-law. But Qin Weibai's brother-in-law really made his scalp tingle in an instant. But Zhou Yuanshan's face immediately changed. Last night's storm would not subside for a long time. This matter was jointly operated by major groups. If it was handled properly, it was even likely that Dongqing Wudi would be removed from his current position. It would be great if the Samsara Palace could do something. After the storm, the strength of the giant group was bound to be weakened. But as long as Dongqing Wudi's position could be kept, everything was not the worst. Zhou Yuanshan nodded with a smile and said softly, Boss Qin, did you come here to see Senior Li? If you just want to see Senior Li, why did you block West Lake? Qin Weibai shook her head and looked at the road ahead. The road ahead was straight and flat. It went all the way up and looked extremely deep. Qin Weibai's eyes were a little dazed. She looked into the distance as if she was looking at the road, but also as if she was looking at another world. I want to go up the mountain, she said softly. Then go up the mountain. Zhou Yuanshan nodded and said, I have informed Senior Li. Well, Grandpa is also here. Take my car and go up together. Military Counselor nodded and glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai still looked into the distance and said softly, you go up and wait for me. Zhou Yuanshan blinked and was a little confused. He wondered if Boss Qin had other things to do. Military Counselor opened his mouth and was about to speak. But the next moment he swallowed all the words back and his eyes changed dramatically. The gentle setting sun fell on Qin Weibai with the afterglow. Shirt, jeans, high heels. Simple and clean. Her hair fluttered gently behind her head. At this moment, Qin Weibai had no coldness, no nobility, and no ethereal and dreamy. The light shone on her and her figure looked extremely pale and fragile. She slowly closed her eyes and put her palms together. She bent down. In the suddenly changing eyes of Zhou Yuanshan and Military Counselor, she slowly knelt down. She knelt down on the mountain road. "Boss, you," military counselor's shocked voice just sounded. Heaven and earth suddenly shook. An extremely sharp clanging sound rang through heaven and earth without warning. No one knew where the sound came from, but the mountains and the lake shook at the same time in an instant. There was no sound in the surroundings, only silence. An indescribable sharpness seemed to cover the whole West Lake in an instant. Qin Weibai knelt on the ground, slowly bent down and touched her head to the ground. In this life she only knelt in front of Li Tianlan when she pleased him. Now she knelt on the vast mountain road, with a humble and pious look. Military counselor hesitated, looked at Zhou Yuanshan, who was a little dull, and pulled him. They got in the car and slowly went up the mountain. Qin Weibai stood up and moved forward. She bent down and bent her knees. She bowed every 3 steps and kowtowed every 9 steps. A gust of wind suddenly appeared on the hard mountain road. In the midsummer evening, the gust of wind was biting cold. The leaves all over the sky were swept up by the gust of wind, sharp as knives. Fallen leaves rushed past Qin Weibai one after another. She kowtowed, stepped forward, bent down, knelt down, and moved forward. The leaves kept falling. Drops of blood began to appear on the white shirt, dark red like plum blossoms. The whole world seemed to have a clear resistance. Qin Weibai walked quietly. As the gust of wind passed, leaves swirled. The knife-like leaves were endless. Blood flowed out of Qin Weibai's body, dyed her clothes red, and fell down along her arms. At some point, the goddess, who had been standing at the peak of the dark world since she appeared, never fragile, never delicate, and never retreated, burst into tears. It was not pain. It was an indescribable repentance and guilt. The flying snow of Kunlun, the prosperity of Yuzhou, the sword radiance all over the sky, and the roaring murderous weapons. It was magnificent and a sad song. She bit her lip hard and went all the way up. Blood spilled on the ground. The gust of wind had begun to become violent. Her figure swayed in the wind, but she walked with great determination. It was a long road of thousands of meters. She was dressed in plain clothes and kowtowed countless times. Blood and tears left clear traces in the gust of wind. The wind gradually died down. It was getting dark. Only the last ray of afterglow of the setting sun was still struggling tenaciously. Above the top of the mountain, at the end of the path, Li Honghe, military counselor, Zhou Yuanshan, Dongqing Hongguang, and everyone from the Li family stood here, looking at Qin Weibai, who was getting closer and closer. Phoenix, who was left here by deity, stood at the back of the crowd. Somehow her face became paler and paler. Dongqing Hongguang looked at Qin Weibai, who kept swaying and couldn't help saying, What is she going to do?" Li Honghe shook his head. This mountain was his territory. But he didn't think Qin Weibai did all this for him. Li Honghe admitted that he couldn't afford such a big gift. He glanced at military counselor. Military counselor's body trembled slightly, but he didn't mean to speak. The night was completely dark. Qin Weibai kowtowed 3 times and finally reached the end of the mountain road. The gust of wind began to disappear. The fallen leaves were no longer flying. Everything became deathly silent. Qin Weibai's face was pale and she swayed. She passed by Li Honghe and Dongqing Hongguang and went straight ahead. There was a huge blue stone in front of her. In front of the blue stone was a steep hillside. Below the hillside was the glittering West Lake. Qin Weibai walked to the hillside and slowly knelt down in front of the West Lake. Her hands, legs, head, she prostrated herself on the ground. Her voice sounded in the silence, extremely weak and faint. "I just want to die without regrets with a sword." All the sounds disappeared completely. An indescribable dead silence enveloped the whole West Lake. Li Honghe suddenly raised his head and looked at the lake. In his sight, the boundless lake water was completely boiling in an instant. Nearly 10,000 meters of water was roaring and surging, as if it was connected with the night sky in the distance. Qin Weibai knelt there motionless. The boiling lake water suddenly lit up with light. The light seemed to come from the water 10,000 meters away, turning into the purest white. The white light leaped and twisted in the night sky, cutting through the sky. In the silent night, an incomparably dazzling bridge suddenly flashed across. The light spread and it was colorful. In the night, above the water, there was an incomparably gorgeous and clear rainbow. The rainbow stretched from a distance and fell directly in front of Qin Weibai. In an instant, Li Honghe's body was tense to the limit. Everyone's body was completely tense. In the silence, the rainbow became clearer and clearer, but the boiling water instantly calmed down. An indescribable feeling was approaching in the darkness. It seemed that something was flying in the night, getting closer and closer. No one saw what it was, but the increasingly clear danger hung over everyone's heart. Qin Weibai was motionless. The incomparably clear rainbow suddenly stabilized. Swish. It was like a sharp sword piercing the ground. In the subtle sound, Lonely Mountain, which had been rebuilt for the most part, suddenly shook. Numerous cracks frantically spread across the ground. The rainbow trembled slightly. The sword energy all over the sky surged and broke out, tearing all the buildings on the mountain in an instant. The entire foundation was completely filled with countless cracks in the blink of an eye. Li Honghe finally understood the rainbow in front of him. This colorful and incomparably gorgeous rainbow, which almost covered the starry sky, was 10,000 meters long. This was not a vision of heaven and earth. It was a sword light. The sword light was here. Where was the sword? Qin Weibai had straightened her body. There was nothing in front of her. But everyone could clearly perceive that there was something in front of her. There was an indescribable emotion between heaven and earth. Sharp, fierce, indifferent, and arrogant. There was also a trace of undisguised anger and rejection. Was this the emotion of that sword? A living, invincible sword. Li Honghe's face was full of disbelief. He stood in front of Qin Weibai, trying to see the sword hidden in the nothingness. A colorful light flashed in front of Qin Weibai. It was like a gaze. But in an instant, the extremely condensed sword energy fell directly in front of Li Honghe. Countless rays of sword light engulfed everyone. Dongqing Hongguang's face changed dramatically, and he subconsciously wanted to defend. But the next second he stopped in shock. Countless sword energy shuttled past them. It didn't hurt him, military counselor, Zhou Yuanshan, or even any veteran of the Li family. All the sword energy gathered into one and aimed directly at Phoenix. Phoenix from the purgatory of heaven capital. Phoenix's face was snow white. That incredibly sharp sword light gradually took shape. She could clearly feel that the sword energy was pointing at her abdomen. That was her child. She and God's child. Li Honghe's face changed dramatically. Countless sword energy burst out of his body in an instant. The colorful sword light surged and rushed into the sword energy around Li Honghe. Li Honghe had long been out of his peak state. All the sword energy collapsed under the sword light. The sword light rotated and directly swept him away. But this sword light was also weakened by Li Honghe's full resistance, and finally, it was taken by Phoenix. Phoenix's body shook violently, and blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were full of horror. There was dead silence on the scene. The people of the Li family didn't know the origin of Phoenix. But they knew her strength. This unknown woman was an expert of the half-step invincible realm. And she was a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. The colorful light swirled slightly. The rainbows in the sky slowly gathered. Qin Weibai stood up slowly as if she was supporting something in front of her. A huge sword edge revealed a lineup in an instant, and then hid in the nothingness again. But everyone could feel the fury and coldness of this sword at this moment. Don't worry. Qin Weibai held the nothingness in front of her. Her voice was hoarse, but there was a hint of relief in it. It will all be ours. Another wave of rejection swept across the world. This time there was a little hesitation. Finally, the world gradually quieted down. The sword light that spanned 10,000 meters and formed a rainbow also began to slowly dissipate in the sky. Qin Weibai patted the nothingness with her bloody palm and whispered, "I feel guilty to you, but I have no regrets in this life." There was a slight buzz in front of her, and finally, everything was completely silent. "Thank you," Qin Weibai whispered. "What the hell is this?" After a long time, Dongqing Hongguang, who was still in shock, asked subconsciously. Qin Weibai turned to look at him and whispered, "It's a sword, of course. What kind of sword can be so terrifying? No, I should ask how this sword was made." The murderous weapon had a spirit. But spirit did not mean life. This sword was clearly a real life. "This is the invincible realm sword." A weak voice suddenly sounded. Li Honghe looked behind Qin Weibai with a pale face. His pale face had a touch of red. The sword of the invincible realm. Chapter 532. In the rainy season, even if it was dawn in Reki City, the light was still dim. Although this place was not shrouded by the polar night, when there was no sunlight, the whole world was still dark. The rain was still falling, getting heavier and heavier, hitting the whole city. It was still midsummer in the northern hemisphere. The temperature in Reki City, which was close to the polar region, was close to 0 degrees. As the rainy season passed, the whole of Eastern Europe would enter the cold winter. The cold wind under the heavy rain blew open a window of the hotel. Dongqing Rushi, who was sleeping, seemed to feel a little cold. She scratched with her white little hands and seemed to feel some warmth around her in a daze. She instinctively leaned over. As soon as she moved, a tearing pain suddenly came from between her legs. She snorted softly and opened her eyes in a daze. The cold wind poured in from the window. The wind and rain were still the same. The soft light shone in every corner of the room. Dongqing Rushi's vision gradually became clear, and the scenes before she fell asleep began to appear in her mind. The strange pain was still there, and it became more and more clear. A blush gradually appeared on Dongqing Rushi's beautiful pale face, which made her look delicate and charming. The girl became a woman. She reached out and touched her face. The corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows were full of the natural charm of a young woman. Dongqing Rushi frowned slightly. She was a little painful, a little sweet, and a little confused. Li Tianlan slept next to her, holding her whole body in his arms and sleeping soundly. Feeling the palm on her buttocks, her body moved cautiously. Li Tianlan subconsciously held her in his arms again in his sleep and hugged her comfortably. Dongqing Rushi exclaimed, and her red face instantly turned pale because of the pain. She leaned against Li Tianlan obediently and looked at him with her clear and moist eyes for a while. She couldn't help but lower her head and gently bite his chest. Li Tianlan raised his hand in a daze and touched her hair, then put it down again. Dongqing Rushi scratched Li Tianlan's body twice, and there was some grievance in her clear eyes. After coming to the hotel last night, considering Li Tianlan's injury, Dongqing Rushi originally wanted to suppress her shyness and take the initiative, but this bad guy directly tore her clothes. When the two of them fell on the bed, she was already a little confused. The ensuing sharp pain made her sober a little, but it didn't take long for her to sink again. Dongqing Rushi, who had never had this kind of experience, had her mind completely blank. Li Tianlan's conquest was direct and violent. She could clearly feel that she had become extremely small in the extreme pleasure, and she was also coaxed by this bad guy to say a lot of shameful words. For the whole night, she seemed to have been made to cry several times by him, and she was almost crazy. It was not until the night was about to pass that Li Tianlan, who behaved a little differently, held her in his arms domineeringly and then fell asleep peacefully. Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan quietly, blinking her beautiful big eyes. She was a little happy, a little angry, a little infatuated, and a little shy. Li Tianlan was not very calm in his sleep. His brows were always furrowed as if he was under endless pressure. It had only been a day, but his aura was obviously much more stable than last night. Although it was still far from the peak, he was no longer weak. She reached out her hand and smoothed out Li Tianlan's frowning brows. After looking at him for a while, she whispered, "It's really a wild boar." The wild boar was still asleep. Dongqing Rushi moved carefully in his arms. She wanted to leave his arms and take a bath. But Li Tianlan held her very tightly. Dongqing Rushi twisted for a long time, but she couldn't leave. Instead, she was sweating because she had to endure the pain. Dongqing Rushi didn't give up. She wanted to escape carefully, but when her escape plan was finally about to succeed, Li Tianlan's palm held her body again and grabbed her back again. Dongqing Rushi frowned and raised her head, but she saw that Li Tianlan had opened his eyes, and there was a trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Where do you want to go?" he asked softly. When did you wake up?" Dongqing Rushi stammered and avoided his eyes. After the two of them had the most intimate relationship, facing Li Tianlan again, she seemed a little unnatural. "I woke up when you were wriggling." Li Tianlan pulled Dongqing Rushi over, gently bit her delicate earlobe and said with a low smile, "Again?" Dongqing Rushi's body fell softly beside Li Tianlan, trembling slightly, and murmured, "It hurts?" Li Tianlan's breathing was a little rapid and his movements became more and more presumptuous. He was extremely infatuated with this body and Dongqing Rushi's voice. Unlike Qin Weibai, she was gentle and charming when she was with Li Tianlan. Even though she had once knelt down in front of Li Tianlan, in his heart, Qin Weibai was still a goddess, flawless and dreamlike. When he was with her, Li Tianlan always felt like he was in a dream, always feeling a little unreal. She was also different from Wang Yuetong. The little princess of the Wang family of Beihai was mischievous, and she also had her own style and wildness in bed. Dongqing Rushi, who looked beautiful and pure, was docile and well-behaved after playing with him. She was really obedient. Every time Li Tianlan attacked, she could feel that she was occupying him wantonly. In front of her, Li Tianlan was like a ball of fire, and he always wanted to bully her subconsciously. Dongqing Rushi's body gradually curled up into a ball beside Li Tianlan. She shook her head pitifully and whispered, No tomorrow, okay? Li Tianlan gently played with Dongqing Rushi's ear and chuckled. If you scream nice, I'll let you go today. Nice, nice? Dongqing Rushi opened her eyes wide and looked at Li Tianlan stupidly. It's not like I didn't scream last night. Li Tianlan looked at her red face, which was like a big ripe apple, and couldn't help but lower his head. Dongqing Rushi reached out to cover his mouth and whispered, brush your teeth first. Good brother. Li Tianlan laughed and looked up at the wind and rain outside the window. The shadow and fighting of last night seemed to be gradually far away, completely diluted by last night's charm. At this time, when he thought of it again, it seemed like a lifetime ago. Dongqing Rushi gently bit Li Tianlan's arm, pointed to the floor and whispered, help me get my underwear. Li Tianlan reached out to pick up a small piece of gauze and shook his head. It's all wet and dry now. It's not comfortable to wear. He subconsciously put the gauze to his nose and sniffed it, with a playful smile. Dongqing Rushi's face instantly turned red. She shrank her body in the quilt and didn't move. Take a shower first. Li Tianlan patted her butt and said with a smile, I'll ask someone to send 2 sets of clothes. Dongqing Rushi rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan, hesitated and slowly sat up. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly. He hesitated for a moment before he finally asked a question that he had been curious about since last night. His body had almost gone completely crazy. Rushi. Why is there no hair? There was silence. Dongqing Rushi sat up wrapped in the quilt and leaned against the bed. Her face was red and she glared at Li Tianlan. I'm really angry, she said softly, and her clear eyes were a little annoyed. Li Tianlan coughed and felt a little guilty. He laughed dryly and said, I didn't say anything. She's very cute. Dongqing Rushi stretched out her tender white foot and kicked Li Tianlan gently. Go take a shower. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi with soft eyes and even a little doting. I'll be busy next. Dongqing Rushi obediently said, Oh, what are you going to do next? I don't know. Li Tianlan said casually. After last night, the overall situation in Eastern Europe was basically settled. At least the 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan State had completely fallen into the hands of Jianghu State. Even if others wanted to protest, they had to have the strength. Next, Jianghu State would slowly pour resources into Wulan State, and eventually control the 5 Eastern European countries firmly in its own hands. Then, with the 5 countries as the foundation, it would gradually encroach on the whole of Eastern Europe. The whole process was destined to be long. 10 or 20 years were already considered fast. Li Tianlan took this place and only needed to guard it. Everything else was Jianghu State's business. I'll go to see Wang Tianzong first in a while, Li Tianlan said. As the Prime Minister of Wulan State, Riker must be very busy now. If he wanted to see him, he would have to wait until midnight. Qin Shilai, Situ Tsangyue, Tribulation, and Raphael were all seriously injured and unconscious now. He couldn't say anything if he went there now. The Snowdance Corps also suffered heavy losses. The casualties must have been counted. Li Tianlan still had to hold a meeting. The high-level members of the Snowdance Corps killed Morton, Violet, and severely damaged the Eastern Church. The distribution of various interests was also in a mess. At this time, Li Tianlan found that although he had won, the situation in Eastern Europe after the victory had become more and more chaotic. However, after all, this was Jianghu State's business. He thought quietly. At present, it was the most important thing to confirm Wang Tianzong's state first. He took out his mobile phone and looked through the address book. He planned to ask someone to send 2 sets of clothes. His clothes could still be worn, but Dongqing Rushi's clothes had been torn into countless strips. However, halfway through the address book, he realized that he actually didn't know many women. He couldn't let a man choose clothes for Dongqing Rushi. At present, there was one person who could do this kind of thing. She was Yun Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master of Mount Shu. However, regardless of seniority or anything else, Li Tianlan had to call Yun Qinshi auntie. Naturally, he couldn't let her do this kind of thing. He put down his mobile phone and was in a daze for a while. Then he shook his head, put on his dirty and damaged clothes and said, There is a shopping mall downstairs. I'll buy you a set of clothes. You take a bath first. Dongqing Rushi said, She was very obedient and quiet. Li Tianlan touched her hair and said with a smile, Good girl. Dongqing Rushi nudged him with her head, carefully moved to the ground with the quilt wrapped around her, and walked to the bathroom with a somewhat unnatural pace. Chapter 533. Wang Tianzong was still in the office of the president. The office of the president only existed in name. The large buildings that had been permeated with the atmosphere of power had been completely shattered by the sword light. The sword light came from the distant sky and crossed 10,000 meters. It traveled in a straight line and tore the square in front of the office of the president. Everything in the office of the president, including the gate, the buildings, the pavilions, the flowers, the trees, the rocks and the water, were all destroyed into pieces in an instant. Only Wang Tianzong's house stood intact in the ruins, which looked extremely strange. The Snowdance Corps had reassembled. The high-level members of the Snowdance Corps, who had raided and destroyed the two major families in Eastern Europe and severely injured the Eastern Church, had all returned. At this time they had all returned to the temporary base of the Snowdance Corps. The temporary base was built on a broken parade square, which was equivalent to surrounding Wang Tianzong again. Wang Tianzong had not moved from beginning to end. He was strangely quiet. It was dinner time in the Snowdance Corps. Several guards came in, put the food on the table and walked out without saying a word. Wang Tianzong, who was standing in front of the window and watching the wind and rain, came to the dining table and sat down. He opened the food box and smiled gently. The entire dark world knew that he was imprisoned here by Li Tianlan. But he was not a prisoner. So he was treated very well here. There were 6 dishes in front of him. They were a combination of meat and vegetables. The dishes were exquisite and looked, smelled and tasted good. A bowl of soup was also made with a fragrant aroma. Another large food box contained at least 3 or 4 caddies of rice with soft color. In addition, there was a bottle of Maotai with high alcohol content. The messy wind and rain never stopped. The food had a tempting warm taste. Wang Tianzong poured himself a glass of wine, took a sip and narrowed his eyes. The big screen in the room suddenly flickered. Summer Solstice's figure appeared on the screen, looking a little lazy. "Have you eaten? Just ready to eat?" Wang Tianzong smiled, looked at the dishes on the table and joked, "In terms of craftsmanship, the person who cooks for me now is much better than you." Summer Solstice rolled her eyes at Wang Tianzong. She was a little unconvinced, but she did not speak. Wang Tianzong thought that she was very good, but her cooking skills were really unflattering. She had been like this since she was a child. Even in the rare field training in childhood and youth, it was Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu who went to find ingredients, and then Wang Tianzong barbecued them. Xie Ji was at most an assistant. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and took a sip of wine. His eyes were peaceful. "Has Qinglei contacted you?" Summer Solstice suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong nodded and said yes. Wang Qinglei had called him in the morning. Not only him, but also the 2 giants and several counselors of the Southeast faction had called him to discuss Dongqing Wudi's private transfer of troops. Although it had only been a day since the incident, the whole giant group was shocked and under great pressure, and Dongqing Wudi was under even more pressure. Last night, a deputy commander of the garrison army near the Dongqing clan was dismissed and investigated. A few hours ago, a senior colonel in the Air Force who was likely to be promoted to Major General in the near future, was also investigated. This senior colonel was the former secretary of the current Air Force commander, Han Lisher, and General Han Lisher had always been one of Dongqing Wudi's most hardcore supporters in the military. A violent storm had already swept through the entire military in one day. Dongqing Wudi targeted the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. At this time, it was reasonable for the Southeast Group to take the lead in fighting back against the giant group. Several giants of the Southeast Group naturally had to ask for Wang Tianzong's opinion in advance. "My attitude has been expressed very clearly," Wang Tianzong said slowly. "Go all out and quit while you're ahead. Go all out. Quit while you're ahead." These were 2 contradictory words, but they were Wang Tianzong's true attitude. Summer Solstice thought about it seriously and said with some uncertainty, "Do you think this incident can't touch the foundation of the giant group? The giant group is bound to lose some important positions. But it can't affect the overall situation. Our Beihai is strong and the Li family is paranoid. But when it comes to self-protection, who can compare with the old master of the Dongqing clan? This time the matter is very big. Of course the nature is also very serious. But if we continue to be persistent, in the end, Li Huaqing will definitely intervene. Now how can the academics leave the Dongqing clan?" Wang Tianzong said indifferently. Summer Solstice held her cheeks in her hands and looked at Wang Tianzong with a smile. She might know these things, but she was too lazy to think about it. She asked directly, "Why?" "Because of the Li family." Wang Tianzong thought about it and said slowly, "Beihai will not allow the Li family to reappear, nor will Kunlun City and the Prince Group. Now there are only 6 groups in Zhongzhou State, the Southeast Group, the Special Exhibition Group and the Prince Group. Once the academics unite, the survival space of the academics will be very small. The North group has always been weak. In recent years, it has been getting closer to the neutral party and rarely intervening in other things. But the academics are different. They have a short time to rise and lack of foundation, but they are full of vigor. Now they are in power. How can they have no ambition? The giant group, which has always been close to Kunlun City and Beihai, is the only ally of the academics. Even if Dongqing Wudi makes a big scene this time, Li Huaqing will personally protect Dongqing Wudi at the critical moment. Now what the academics want most is nothing more than to take several important positions in the military from the Dongqing clan. This may make Dongqing Wudi uncomfortable, but it will not make him turn against them, nor will it affect their cooperation. Wang Tianzong lowered his head, lit a cigarette and continued, if Dongqing Wudi falls in the current situation, it will be difficult for the academics to put their own people in the position of the minister of the army headquarters. The new minister of the army headquarters is very likely to come from the Southeast Group or Kunlun City. If they lose the military power, the position of the academics will only be more precarious. After all, Li Huaqing's term of office is not long. Summer solstice blinked. Li Huaqing's term of office was probably less than 4 years, but his influence would not fade seriously in at least 10 years. If we support the academics and replace Dongqing Wudi with their own people? Summer solstice asked lazily. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. With the strength of the Wang family of Beihai, if they cooperated with the academics after suppressing the giant group, he calculated the odds of winning and finally shook his head. In theory yes, but Li Huaqing will not accept it. Even if Dongqing Wudi fell because of this, the influence of the Dongqing clan could not be easily eliminated. At that time, it was destined to be a very tragic game. The academics did not have a big advantage in the military. If they sat in Dongqing Wudi's position, they were destined to play with Dongqing Wudi's forces. In this way the academics would be surrounded by enemies on all sides. In the military, they would have to compete with Dongqing Wudi's forces for military power. In the special warfare system, they would have to compete with Kunlun City's interests. In politics, the Wang family of Beihai and the Prince Group were eyeing them covetously. They were fighting in all aspects. The final result could only be the decline of national power or stagnation. As the ruling group, what good evaluation could the academics have at that time? Even if he accepts it, I can't agree. Wang Tianzong said in a low voice. Jianghu state could fight internally, but in any case, it should not affect the stability of the overall situation. This was a principle and a hard demand of the Wang family of Beihai. The reason was very simple. Beihai province and Jianghu state were one. The stronger Jianghu state was, the stronger Beihai would be, and vice versa. Summer solstice replied softly. Wang Tianzong shook his head and suddenly said, how about the coldness of 9 states? Forging the coldness of 9 states was the top priority of the Wang family of Beihai now. Summer solstice's expression finally became serious. She whispered, the human emperor has begun to integrate with the coldness of 9 states. It will take about a week. A week? Wang Tianzong muttered to himself. There's still time. Summer solstice said softly. Wang Tianzong nodded. He was silent for a while, then suddenly sighed and said, has Yuetong contacted her family recently? Summer solstice was stunned and a little lost in thought. She whispered, she hasn't contacted. Since leaving the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Yuetong had never contacted her family. Summer solstice knew that he and a few young people from the East Emperor Palace were now in Tiannan. Although they had not made any progress for the time being, they had done a good job. However, Wang Yuetong had always been silent. Even when Li Tianlan was in a desperate situation yesterday, Wang Yuetong had been silent. What this meant was self-evident. Wang Tianzong frowned. Summer solstice looked at Wang Tianzong's expression, and her voice became softer. Old Wang, do you really want to kill him? Li Tianlan, that kid. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Wang Tianzong smiled bitterly without hiding it. Things have come to this. It's not that I want to kill him. It's Tianlan who forces me to kill him. What choice do I have? His smile was frank and helpless. On the night when Li Tianlan went to the battlefield from here, he used many means to talk with Li Tianlan. But what he said was all true. If Li Tianlan agreed to his conditions, he would really hand over the Wang family of Beihai to Wang Yuetong. From now on, if the Wang family of Beihai was not in a life-and-death crisis, he would not show up for the rest of his life. If Li Tianlan agreed to his conditions, there might be no Sword Emperor and Summer Solstice in the Dark World now. Wang Qianzong would only become a name on the stone of formidable person. But there was no if. In this situation it's not that Beihai can't tolerate him, nor is it that he can't tolerate Beihai. Wang Qianzong shook his head. It's that although Beihai is big, it can't tolerate his ambition. More than 3 years ago, when Wang Yuedong's feelings for Li Tianlan had just sprouted in Huading, Wang Qianzong had commented that Li Tianlan had wild ambitions and was definitely not a good match. He hit the nail on the head. Wang Qianzong looked out of the window in silence for a long time. After a long time, Summer Solstice suddenly said, "Oh, by the way, what do you think about Jiang Shangyu?" Jiang Shangyu was now appointed as the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Now he had gone to Yuzhou to report on his work and would arrive in Eastern Europe in a day or two. From a graduate to the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps, it was already one of the hottest topics in Jianghu state. But no matter how popular it was not as shocking as the sudden improvement of his realm. From the beginning of the thunder-shocking realm, he began to rise. Overnight he crossed the thunder-shocking realm stabilizer, the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu's combat capability directly entered the top level of the half-step invincible realm, which was the combat capability of the invincible realm. Now Jiang Shangyu was not even weaker than Li Tianlan. Compared to his status, his realm was the real leap to the sky which could be called a miracle. After the breakthrough, Jiang Shangyu's attitude was even more intriguing. He began to break through when Gu Fenghua, the deputy governor of Kunlun City, and General Mo Qingping, the first deputy minister of the general politics, arrived in Beijing. Just the aftermath of the breakthrough seriously injured Gu Fenghua and Mo Qingping, two thunder-shocking realm experts. Such a posture was simply domineering. Although it was only for a day, the whole Zhongzhou state felt the restlessness of the Jiang family in Beijing after many years of low-key. This can't be a breakthrough. Wang Qianzong thought about it seriously and then said slowly, "No one will cross so many realms in a row overnight, no matter how talented he is. We have all seen real geniuses. Even if the ones we have seen before are not the best, Li Tianlan is enough to explain this word. But even he has no possibility of reaching the sky in one step. Geniuses may break through very quickly, but it takes time after all. One night? How is that possible? But it's the truth." Summer Solstice frowned and said quietly, "I suddenly find that we underestimated the Jiang family. I'm not sure about Jiang Shangyu's state, but he will come to Eastern Europe eventually. I can only be sure after seeing him with my own eyes." Wang Qianzong said slowly. Summer Solstice agreed. Wang Qianzong gradually fell silent. Summer Solstice turned off the video at some point, and the room became quiet again. After an unknown period of time, the video communication rang again. Wang Qianzong glanced at it casually, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He hesitated for a moment but still connected the video. In the study room with rich colors and deep and dignified colors, the figure of Li Huaqing, the president of Zhongzhou state, appeared on the screen. Wang Qianzong casually bowed and said calmly, "Mr. President." On the screen Li Huaqing nodded with a smile. He looked at the environment around Wang Qianzong and asked straightforwardly without any nonsense, "How is the situation in Wulan state?" This question, which should have been communicated with Li Tianlan, was asked to Wang Qianzong, which seemed a little weird. Wang Qianzong did not hesitate and said flatly, "Now it seems that the situation in Wulan state and several surrounding countries has been stable. It can be said that the general trend has been settled. In this battle, Marshal Li's contribution is indispensable. Yes, I didn't expect Tianlan to do this. Qianzong, it seems that your nomination was correct. You have a good eye for talent." Li Huaqing smiled with some emotion. Wang Qianzong twitched the corner of his mouth and did not speak. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him and suddenly said, "I will visit Wulan state in the next few days. I have decided to let the Snowdance Corps take full charge of the affairs in Eastern Europe. If Qianzong has nothing to do, why don't you come back with me?" This sentence was simple and clear, and the meaning it represented was even more simple and clear. Wang Qianzong looked up at Li Huaqing and narrowed his eyes. Li Huaqing's face gradually became serious. In Wulan state, Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps are enough to control the overall situation. Qianzong, you may have resentment in your heart, but national affairs are more important. Tianlan has conquered Wulan state, and it can't be changed. Do you agree with this? With Marshal Li's talent, occupying the 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan state is already the limit. If you go further, I'm afraid you will die young." Wang Qianzong said expressionlessly. Li Huaqing frowned and was a little unhappy. However, before he could speak, Wang Qianzong continued, It's not meaningless for me to stay here. The overall situation of Wulan state has been settled. The overall situation of the 5 Eastern European countries has been settled. Of course I agree. If Marshal Li wants the land of the 5 countries, I can give it to him. But what I want here is the whole of Eastern Europe. Do you agree with this? I don't agree. Chapter 534. Wang Qinzong turned to look at the door. In front of the empty door, there was the sound of wind and rain falling, illusory and illusory. Li Tianlan appeared silently in front of the door with a calm face. Wang Qinzong narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. Their eyes met for a moment. At this moment, even Li Huaqing, who was thousands of miles away, could feel the indescribable sharpness through the screen. He frowned slightly and said slowly, I know that you have different ideas, but you are both pillars of Jianghu state, even the pillar of Jianghu state. Now you are fighting outside, I hope you can take the overall situation as the most important thing. He paused. In the somewhat awkward silence, his eyes gradually became sharp, and he said indifferently, this is not a suggestion. If it was not a suggestion, it was naturally a request. Could even be said to be an order. Wang Qinzong smiled indifferently and said softly, President, you worry too much. Marshal Li is young, but his sharpness is so strong that even I will be moved. Of course, I will cherish such a talent and give him full respect. Li Huaqing chuckled and looked at Li Tianlan with meaningful eyes. His Majesty has always been a model for me to learn from. I have always respected him. Rest assured, President. I know what I should do. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Qinzong and said expressionlessly. Li Huaqing shook his head and thought that it was all bullshit. But no matter what, at least this was the clear attitude of these two. His face relaxed slightly and he said indifferently, That's good. I will visit Wulan state in the near future. I'll trouble you to take care of many affairs in Eastern Europe. Wang Qinzong did not speak. Li Tianlan nodded. Li Huaqing took a deep look at the two of them, hesitated, and finally hung up the phone. The room was quiet again. Wang Qinzong and Li Tianlan looked at each other quietly, and the atmosphere was subtle and weird. After a long time, Wang Qinzong raised his eyebrows and asked casually, Have you eaten? I ate before I came and I can have more. Li Tianlan walked to the table and sat down. He quietly filled a bowl of rice for himself and poured a glass of wine at the same time. Wang Qinzong also sat down. Li Tianlan calmly raised his glass. The two of them clinked their glasses and drained the wine in one gulp. The silence continued. Time passed slowly. The food on the table gradually decreased. Nearly 5 caddies of rice were swept clean by the two of them, and only less than half of the bottle of Maotai was left. Wang Qinzong slowly picked up a tissue and wiped his mouth. Suddenly he said, You did a good job in Wulan state. I did not come here today to listen to your praise. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and handed it to Wang Qinzong. His tone was flat. Wang Qinzong smiled. He meant what he said. The game in Wulan state could be said to be the first fight between Wang Qinzong and Li Tianlan. He left the Caesar Hotel and was imprisoned here. So anything that happened in Wulan state last night had nothing to do with him. Even if Li Tianlan died, it had nothing to do with him. The Shadow Throne, Rothschild, the Eastern Church, Morton, and Violet. They were all chips in Wang Qinzong's hands. The balance of victory tilted toward Wang Qinzong countless times. In their first fight, Li Tianlan lost and was almost doomed eternally. But in the end it was the Li family who won. Most of the forces began to withdraw from Eastern Europe. The Shadow Throne was disbanded, and King Tong was disabled. Even Paul's injury was extremely serious. The war potential of Rothschild for at least 5 or even 10 years in the future was completely exhausted. Before last night, Wang Qinzong's most reliable ally was the Shadow Throne. At that time there was no tyrant around him. After last night he found tyrant, but he also lost the Shadow Throne. Overnight, Wang Qinzong's loss could be said to be extremely heavy. However, Wang Qinzong was not angry. Things had developed to this point, which almost meant that at least in the chaos of Eastern Europe, Wang Qinzong had lost the best chance to get rid of Li Tianlan, and he could only look forward. He lit the cigarette, took a deep breath and said quietly, The President will visit Wulan state in the near future. What do you think of this? It's a good thing. Li Tianlan took a sip of the fragrant soup and said casually, I welcome him with both hands. But Wulan state and several neighboring countries may not welcome him. Wang Qinzong said in a short tone. It's not up to him. Li Tianlan shook his head lightly. Wang Qinzong looked at Li Tianlan quietly. After a moment of silence he said slowly, I have some candidates here. you might as well think about it. I think they can follow the president to Wulan State. This is a good thing for Wulan State, Jianghu State, you and me. Li Tianlan's action of serving the soup paused slightly, and he looked up at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were emotionless and he said lightly, "Cooperation?" Wang Tianzong said calmly, "Think about it? Forget it." Li Tianlan put down the bowl in his hand and said straightforwardly. He didn't even ask Wang Tianzong who he wanted to recommend. At this moment, for Jianghu State, Wulan State, Li Tianlan and the giant group, the most important thing was Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State. This was a major event that attracted worldwide attention. In the past 2 decades, this was the first time that the president of Jianghu State had visited Wulan State. And following Li Huaqing was a huge delegation. However, it was strange that there were very few officials in this huge delegation of more than 300 people. Most of them were important figures in some wealthy families in Jianghu State, or the bosses of some large groups in some countries. What this meant was self-evident. For Jianghu State this was a feast. During this visit, Prime Minister Riker of Wulan State would sign an agreement with President Li Huaqing of Jianghu State on behalf of Wulan State. The agreement was still being drawn up, but there was one crucial clause. After the agreement was signed, the 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan State would pay at least 2 trillion in war reparations to Jianghu State. This sum of reparations was enough to completely drain the financial resources of several countries in a short period of time. They could only rely on Jianghu State financially. What followed was Jianghu State's investment in several countries. This was an almost undisguised plunder. And these plunderers were members of the delegation that followed Li Huaqing to visit. The members of the delegation covered almost all fields, including military industry, banking, finance, energy, trade, real estate, media, tourism, hotel, catering, construction, food, and so on. The 5 Eastern European countries would usher in a real new situation. At this time, as long as the members of the delegation that followed Li Huaqing had something to gain, they would gain a lot. The power of Jianghu State would continue to develop in a monopolistic manner in all fields of the 5 countries. All the wealth of the 5 countries would flow into Jianghu State continuously. If they took down the 5 Eastern European countries, Jianghu State could at least have tens of millions of more jobs, and then liberate more labor force. The national strength would also slowly increase. Within 5 years, the 5 Eastern European countries would be tightly tied to Jianghu State. Within 20 years, a word from Jianghu State could completely overturn all the patterns of the 5 Eastern European countries. Within 50 years, the 5 Eastern European countries would completely become vassals of Jianghu State. This was war. On both sides of victory and defeat, there were insane profits and desperate circumstances. If Jianghu State wanted to achieve all these goals, what it needed was stability. The Arctic Ocean Command and the Snowdance Corps were the cornerstones of stability. At this time, every giant or group that followed Li Huaqing here would get the opportunity to develop rapidly and rise continuously in the future as long as they could gain a foothold here. Under such circumstances, whether they could stay or not depended on the will of Jianghu State. But whether they could gain a foothold after staying or not depended on the attitude of Li Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps. Li Huaqing's visit to Eastern Europe would take about a week or half a month. Li Tianlan only needed to make good use of this time to establish a huge network of contacts in Jianghu State. The rise of the Li family would also be a foregone conclusion. Wang Tianzong wanted to stop all this, but after last night, the overall situation had been settled. Even he could not change it. Under such circumstances, Wang Tianzong could only choose to cooperate with Li Tianlan. He could not take away the 5 Eastern European countries, so he could only get a share of the following feast. However, Li Tianlan refused his request without hesitation. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Wang Tianzong laughed and said, "You should listen to my conditions. Even if it's a life-and-death feud, sometimes we can cooperate. Go ahead." Li Tianlan said blandly, "It's just that I'm not ready to accept it." Wang Tianzong glanced at him and said blandly, "As I said, you took down the 5 Eastern European countries and held them. They're yours. But my eyes are on the whole of Eastern Europe. You and I are now cooperating in the 5 Eastern European countries. When the whole of Eastern Europe falls into the hands of Beihai, I will not treat you badly." "The whole of Eastern Europe?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "You used all your means last night. In this situation, can you still take the whole of Eastern Europe? Maybe in a few years, you will understand that in the general trend, some means are the most useful and the most useless. I'm the Sword Emperor. It doesn't matter if I don't have means as long as I have a sword." Wang Tianzong said calmly. Your sword is still not good enough. Li Tianlan said blandly. Wang Tianzong was very strong. As the only half-step chosen one in the dark world, he was only half a step away from the real supreme. But half a step was also a distance. At least in Li Tianlan's eyes, Wang Tianzong's strength was not invincible. It's a little worse but not far from it. Wang Tianzong said calmly, my sword energy is enough, and my sword intent is a little short of perfection. But is your sword intent really perfect? What do you mean? Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong with deep eyes. Wang Tianzong laughed and said, it doesn't mean anything. Your sword intent may be perfect, but obviously the sword stroke last night was not. The sword intent of that stroke seemed to have reached the peak, but it was still a little bit short, really just a little bit. He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and said, so, you want to use that sword to mislead me and stop me from breaking through? Li Tianlan's pupils shrank slightly. I finished that sword. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan calmly. He said softly, thank you. Chapter 535. At this moment, it was really hard for Li Tianlan to describe his feelings. As the sword emperor of Jianghu state, Wang Tianzong stood in front of the Wang family of Beihai. For Li Tianlan, no matter in martial arts or in the future, he could be said to be his biggest enemy. The most important thing was that Wang Tianzong's will was extremely firm. He did not have the unique conditions of wind and thunder veins and heavenly king heart. Even among his peers he was not the best in terms of aptitude. But it was such a person who walked step by step to the peak of the invincible realm, and then broke through to the half-step invincible realm. Now he was only a step away from the chosen one. The most important thing was that this step seemed to be unable to stop Wang Tianzong. Li Tianlan's inner premonition was very clear. Wang Tianzong would definitely be able to break through, and it would not take too long. Because of this he fought with Wang Tianzong at the peak. His sword intent was perfect. His sword intent was supreme. It was no exaggeration to say that Li Tianlan could now instruct anyone in swordsmanship. What he lacked was the realm of martial arts or the sword energy. But in terms of height, he could be said to be the one standing at the highest point in martial arts. So after borrowing deity sword energy, the combat capability he exerted was even far greater than that of deity himself. That was why he and Wang Tianzong had an earth-shattering sword strike. In terms of sword intent, that sword strike was truly perfect, but it was slightly lacking in explosive power. Not to mention the peak of the invincible realm, even the half-step chosen one could hardly perceive the gap. What Wang Tianzong needed now was the truly perfect sword intent. Li Tianlan believed that his sword strike could bring him a lot of inspiration. If Wang Tianzong broke through with this sword strike as the foundation, even if he succeeded, he would still be a little lacking. This was a quiet misdirection, which was equivalent to putting a boulder in Wang Tianzong's way of swordsmanship. However, Wang Tianzong saw the shortcomings of this sword strike and even made up for it. So the boulder in the way of swordsmanship became a bridge to the sky. Li Tianlan took a sip of the wine in the cup and took a deep look at Wang Tianzong. After a long time he sincerely said, amazing. You flatter me. Wang Tianzong said blandly without pride or displeasure. Li Tianlan's realm was not high, and his combat capability was nothing in Wang Tianzong's eyes. But in the whole dark world, he was the only one who was qualified to discuss swordsmanship with Wang Tianzong. This alone was worthy of Wang Tianzong putting Li Tianlan on the same level as himself. But you haven't broken through yet. Li Tianlan said slowly. If Wang Tianzong could really complete the sword intent of that sword, it was enough to show that his swordsmanship had really reached the advanced level. Then what he was facing now should be the chosen one. Let's wait a little longer. Wang Tianzong said calmly, if I break through now, I have 80% confidence. But since I have 100% confidence, why only 80%? After a moment of silence, Li Tianlan nodded and said, that makes sense. Wang Tianzong didn't say much but raised his glass. The two of them drank up the wine in their glasses. Wang Tianzong poured 2 more glasses and put the almost empty bottle aside. Li Tianlan played with the cup in his hand and looked at Wang Tianzong. His calm eyes were a little complicated. What are you thinking about? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. The trial day was over. The overall situation in Eastern Europe was basically settled. If there was no God-given opportunity, Wang Tianzong was unlikely to attack Li Tianlan in Eastern Europe. So today he was extraordinarily calm. You've made all the preparations. Li Tianlan sighed softly, lit a cigarette and took a deep puff. Wang Tianzong smiled and did not deny it. After completing Li Tianlan's sword, the real path had appeared in front of him. It could even be said that he was almost not far from the real chosen one. He didn't break through now, just waiting for an opportunity. As for the preparation before the breakthrough, Wang Tianzong had been perfect, whether it was his physical state, sword energy, sword intent, sword momentum, or mentality. What he lacked now was a sword that could fully exert all his combat power. The coldness of 9 states was also being forged. Now he really didn't need to prepare anything anymore. He just needed to wait. This was Wang Tianzong's perfect path. More than 20 years ago, since the collapse of the Li family, Wang Tianzong had officially broken through to the invincible realm. To this day, his martial arts seemed to have been smooth and singing all the way, but almost no one could see what Wang Tianzong had suffered for it. Li Tianlan could imagine that kind of mountain-like pressure. There were still 2 experts at the peak of the invincible realm in this generation of the Wang family of Beihai. But for many years, Wang Tianzong had carried the Wang family of Beihai alone and was invincible in the dark world. He only advanced and never retreated. At home and abroad, there were bloody storms, mutual deception, and sword shadows. No matter what he encountered, he could only move forward. He would either rush over or die on the way forward. The Wang family of Beihai was the peak of the world. How could he retreat from such a height? If he took a step back, the entire Wang family of Beihai would face a bottomless abyss. And all the pressure had been on Wang Tianzong alone for many years. Under great pressure, Wang Tianzong finally found a perfect path of his own, which was to reach the chosen one. Li Tianlan was in a daze. He also had his own perfect path. However, he encountered some problems at this time. Although these problems were possible to be solved after the battle last night, it seemed to be just a possibility at this time. I'm thinking about my future path. Li Tianlan's voice was calm. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said calmly, "Your Majesty, do you have any suggestions?" One of them represented the Sword Emperor of the Wang family. The other represented the Marshal of the Li family. Perhaps just a few minutes ago, neither of them had thought that the topic would go deep to this extent. Wang Tianzong used Li Tianlan's sword to make up for his own path to the chosen one. Now Li Tianlan was asking Wang Tianzong for advice. Wang Tianzong did not refuse. His eyes were serious and deep. After thinking for a while, he said slowly, "Too perfect is imperfect. Your strength, speed, willpower, and sword intent are all complete, but your realm is too low now. This problem can't be solved at all." Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and did not hide it. This might be the biggest problem on his martial arts road, or even the only problem. At this time, if he were in the invincible realm, with such perfect conditions concentrated on him, he could break through to the peak of the invincible realm in the shortest time and stand at the same height as Wang Tianzong. But he had not entered the invincible realm yet. His strength, speed, and sword intent could not be perfectly integrated, which was equivalent to cutting off the possibility of entering the invincible realm. But only by using the current conditions to rush into the invincible realm could he really reach the supreme realm of the chosen one. This was like an endless loop. The road was very clear, but Li Tianlan could not go through it. "In your Majesty's opinion, what are the 4 realms of martial arts?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong chuckled and said flatly, "Martial arts is martial arts. There is no difference between the 4 realms of martial arts. The reason why the seniors divided the martial Dao into 4 realms was because they wanted to find a path on the martial Dao." Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly lit up for a moment. There is no problem that cannot be solved. If you want to solve your problem, you can only find a way in the 4 realms of martial arts. Wang Tianzong continued. Li Tianlan nodded and said calmly, "I think so too." Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said seriously, "But your martial art seems to bypass the 4 realms of martial arts, so it becomes so embarrassing. Since the 4 realms of martial arts can be bypassed, why can't the invincible realm be bypassed?" Li Tianlan asked. Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. He looked at Li Tianlan and did not speak for a long time. "I saw a man without a realm, without the 4 realms of martial arts, and without the invincible realm," Li Tianlan said quietly. Wang Tianzong nodded and did not speak. Of course, he knew who Li Tianlan was talking about. Li Tianlan was talking about the one who lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan last night. Strictly speaking, deity of the purgatory of heaven capital had no realm. He was not in the invincible realm, nor did he stay in any of the 4 realms of martial arts. He cultivated a pure sword which was incomparably fierce. When the sword light was unsheathed, its power was no less than that of the peak of the invincible realm. The battle in the case of treason destroyed all the foundation of deity's martial arts. He could only find another way to take the present road, but it seemed that this was his limit. Similarly, I have also seen two lunatics who did not take the usual road. One went straight to the invincible realm from the chi-controlling realm, and the other wanted to go straight to the invincible realm from the fire-flaming realm. Li Tianlan continued. Of course, it was clear who these two people were talking about. Wang Tianzong shook his head and said, Tribulation state is very problematic. Although he succeeded, it was no different from failure. As for Fireman, even if he succeeded that year, it is estimated that the current tribulation will also have problems. That can only mean that their path still needs to continue to be perfected. Li Tianlan said calmly, in my opinion, the four realms of martial arts do not exist. The so-called chi-controlling realm represents speed, the ice-condensing realm represents sword energy and sword intent, the fire-flaming realm is willpower, and the thunder-shocking realm is power. He looked at Wang Tianzong and whispered, if this is the case, what is the invincible realm? There seemed to be countless sword lights flashing in Wang Tianzong's eyes, and he did not speak for a while. It is perfect. Li Tianlan said indifferently, too perfect is imperfect? I don't agree with this. If too perfect is imperfect, it can only mean that such perfection is not really perfect. So, Wang Tianzong's tone was as heavy as a sea. Do you want to recultivate the four realms of martial arts? I didn't recultivate. As I said, I don't agree with the so-called four realms of martial arts. I just think that since my strength and speed are too perfect to be integrated, what will happen if they continue to be perfect and go to the real limit? Li Tianlan lowered his head and said slowly. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and was silent for a long time. If there was no four realms of martial arts, where was the limit of human speed? Where was the limit of power? Where was the limit of sword energy? At least in the current successful example, Tribulation, who only cultivated the chi-controlling realm, had reached the invincible realm. But obviously, Tribulation's path was not the limit, because he encountered problems. This was Li Tianlan's current idea. According to his idea, speed and strength or any other condition, if reached the limit, should have the combat capability comparable to the peak of the invincible realm. The speed alone was equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm. The strength was also equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm. When strength, speed, sword energy, sword intent, and willpower reached the peak of the invincible realm, what would be the result? If there was such a day, would Li Tianlan still need to integrate these things? Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. At this moment he really felt the pressure from Li Tianlan, which was majestic and heavy like a new world. If this is the case, all the realms of martial arts are meaningless to you, including the invincible realm. Wang Tianzong said slowly after a long silence. Martial arts itself doesn't need realms. Li Tianlan raised his head and looked at Wang Tianzong. For me, if there are realms, there are only two realms. Under the Chosen One is supreme. He chuckled. Invincible realm? Look at the so-called invincible realm who died last night. How ridiculous. Under the Chosen One was supreme. This was the purest martial arts. Clear and distinct. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath, but he didn't feel happy. For a moment he felt suffocated. He suddenly didn't know what to say. After a long time, he shook his head and said with a bitter smile, How bold you are. This is my kendo. Li Tianlan said slowly. This was the inspiration brought to him by deity's sword energy last night, but it could also be regarded as his original idea. It was just that he didn't think about this problem before he really encountered a problem. It wasn't until the punch he threw at Jiang Chenyan on the date of death but didn't make him realize this problem. Last night his idea became clear. It's feasible. Wang Tianzong said slowly after a long silence. The path that Li Tianlan saw himself was really amazing, but Li Tianlan had the courage to show his path to himself, and Wang Tianzong also had the courage to recognize Li Tianlan's path. Without this magnanimity, what kind of chosen one was? When I succeed in martial arts, no matter what position you and I are in at that time, alive or dead, I should toast you. Li Tianlan laughed. Perhaps only he knew what Wang Tianzong's words meant to him. Wang Tianzong looked at him and narrowed his eyes slightly. What is kendo? He asked suddenly. Kendo is kendo. Li Tianlan looked calm. Wang Tianzong nodded and said faintly, I know my sword. My kendo is a mountain which can accommodate everything. And your kendo is a sword which can penetrate everything. If you and I are both chosen ones, you are no match for me. His voice was clear, slow, and grand, and he said each word with majestic sword energy. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then he picked up the glass in front of him and drank up the last wine. He stood up, walked to the door and said faintly, fallacy. His figure was getting farther and farther, but his voice was still clear. My kendo is a way which can destroy everything and naturally can accommodate everything. Chapter 536. The sun rose and the moon set. West Lake had completely calmed down. The army that had blocked West Lake for more than 36 hours had completely withdrawn a few hours ago. The quiet and misty Lin ushered in the morning sun again. Qin Weibai stood quietly at the top of the mountain, looking at West Lake in front of her, silent. She had been standing here for a whole day, not moving or speaking. The rainbow, which was bound to cause countless debates, had disappeared. The boiling lake had completely calmed down. But the sword energy, which almost covered heaven and earth, was still flowing. The incomparably dense sword energy kept gathering behind Qin Weibai. Wherever the sword energy passed, the space shook and the whole West Lake was hazy. The strong sense of vagueness enveloped the whole Overwatch Council until it slowly disappeared just now. In the morning, under the faint sunlight, everything was completely calm. No one left the Overwatch Council. Everyone was looking forward to Qin Weibai's explanation. They knew that Qin Weibai had invited an unprecedented and invincible sword from West Lake. But until now they had not seen what the sword looked like. The divine sword stood in the nothingness, and the sword energy completely surrounded Qin Weibai. Both she and the sword were incomparably ethereal and mysterious. Li Honghe stood quietly behind Qin Weibai. His expression was still calm, but his eyes were a little dazed. Since the rainbow rose into the sky that night, his spirit had been in a trance. A sword light crossed thousands of miles and formed a rainbow. This was the strongest sword light that Li Honghe had ever seen in his life. But this sword light did not come from a person but from a sword. This sword was unimaginable, but it was real. For Li Honghe, who had used swords all his life, that sword was simply a magic weapon that he had dreamed of. Most importantly, when the sword appeared and its light illuminated the dark night, he clearly sensed a hint of familiarity from the illusory sword. In his sight, all the sword energy was concentrated behind Qin Weibai. She slowly turned around, and her dreamy face was pale and quiet. Li Honghe stared into her eyes and said word by word, "The endless sky is there." He did not use a question. It was a statement of affirmation. The infinite sky used to be a murderous weapon belonging to the Li family, but it was broken into countless pieces in the border battle more than 20 years ago. Li Honghe left Yuzhou with the Li family and took root at the border for many years. He found some of them. Some of them fell into the hands of Kunlun City, and some fell into the hands of the Wang family of Beihai. Could it be that some of them had fallen into Qin Weibai's hands? However, if the fragment of the endless sky was really added to this sword, how much would it take for him to clearly feel the existence of the endless sky? Yes. Qin Weibai was silent for a moment and nodded. The corners of Li Honghe's mouth moved. Before he could speak, an extremely sharp and cold aura had completely enveloped him, with undisguised killing intent, naked and fierce. Li Honghe's body stiffened slightly as if he was facing a formidable enemy. Qin Weibai carried a sword on her back. However, it was also an unknown and incomprehensible life form. This living sword expressed undisguised hostility to Li Honghe as soon as it was born. Could even be called killing intent. For example, the sword light that had slashed at Li Honghe. Li Honghe's heart beat rapidly a few times and he said in a hoarse voice, "Whose sword is this?" Qin Weibai looked at Li Honghe. Her eyes were indifferent and bright. "Now it's in my hands, so it's naturally mine." There was a feeling of resistance slowly rising behind her, but the sword hidden in nothingness did not have much reaction in the end. "What about before you?" Li Honghe asked in a hurry. "Before me, it was Huangtu's sword." Qin Weibai was silent for a moment and said flatly, "Who?" "Who?" Two voices sounded at the same time, speaking in unison. Dongqing Hongguang and Li Honghe, who were nearby, took a step forward at the same time and asked. Their eyes were fixed on Qin Weibai, with undisguised absurdity in their eyes. Qin Weibai's eyes were dim. She glanced at Li Honghe and Dongqing Hongguang and she laughed softly. Her smile was presumptuous and perfect. "Didn't you hear me clearly? Or do you want me to say more?" "Huangtu's sword?" Dongqing Hongguang stared at Qin Weibai's back, his voice dry and stiff. Li Honghe was silent for a moment and said slowly, "So, you used to be Dongqing Huangtu's woman?" He deliberately emphasized the word "used to." "I'm Tianlan's woman," Qin Weibai said calmly. Li Honghe nodded, a little slow and stiff. He seemed to not know what to say. He stood there looking a little dull. "Is there anything else you want to say?" Qin Weibai looked at Li Honghe and asked. Li Honghe shook his head. His figure was stooped and old. In the morning wind and sunshine, he looked like a frozen statue. After a long time he smiled bitterly. I see, I can't believe it. It was not until this moment that he really understood what Samsara Palace was, understood Qin Weibai's hostility to him, and even understood where this sword's hostility came from. You want to kill me? He took a step back and stood firm, saying in a confused tone. Your life is full of ups and downs, which can be regarded as a miracle in the whole dark world. You can be the first one in Jianghu state in the past 100 years. With such generosity, courage, and scheming, are you afraid of death? Qin Weibai's voice was a little cold. How can I dare to die if I'm unwilling? Li Honghe sighed softly. At least you've succeeded. Qin Weibai said slowly. It's all illusory. Li Honghe seemed to gradually regain his composure and his tone was cold. But for me it's all real. Qin Weibai said heavily word by word. Li Honghe was silent for a long time before he said hoarsely, It makes sense. So you deserve to die. Qin Weibai walked past him. But I won't kill you for the time being. I even hope you can live a little longer. With your identity and status, you should see a different world and a different era. That's what I want to see. Li Honghe said in a low voice, whether you believe it or not. Qin Weibai walked past Li Honghe and looked at the living area of the Supervisory Council, which was about to be completed but collapsed again. After a moment of silence she suddenly said, I want to ask you for 2 people. She said want, not borrow. Li Honghe raised his eyebrows slightly. He asked, who? Qingye. Qin Weibai said slowly, and Chess Emperor. Chess Emperor? Not only Li Honghe but also Dongqing Hongguang's face changed. However, Li Honghe was surprised while Dongqing Hongguang was worried. Li Honghe was not surprised that Qin Weibai would ask for Qingye. Among the people who stayed with him now, although Qingye was a woman, her strength was already the first among the veterans of the Li family. She was a half-step invincible realm expert. But Chess Emperor was also a half-step invincible realm expert. But he was a person who had been seriously ignored by the outside world from beginning to end. When the Li family was at the border he was unknown. Even when the Li family was at its peak he was also unknown. What? Qin Weibai asked. I didn't expect you to want Chess Emperor. Li Honghe said with a wry smile. The first person of the sacred guards is worthy of my request. Qin Weibai said. At the peak of the Li family they were invincible. The invincible realm experts of each generation had their own most powerful team. The people who united around the god of war of the Li family were called sacred guards by the dark world. The current Fire Man and the current Yudong Lai were the sacred guards around Li Honghe. Chess Emperor was also one of the guards. But he was not Li Honghe's but Li Guangtu's guard. The chief guard. Even in the Li family this was the highest level secret. Because even in the past the identity of Chess Emperor had not been exposed. Everyone thought that the chief guard around Li Guangtu was Fire Man, who Li Honghe put beside him. Li Honghe did not expect Qin Weibai to know this secret. But when he saw the sword behind him, he said with a wry smile, Aren't you afraid that you can't control it? Military counselor is watching him. It won't affect the overall situation. Qin Weibai said. Li Honghe thought for a while, finally nodded and said faintly, Okay. Qin Weibai took a deep look at him, nodded and said, I'll come back in 3 days. Where are you going? Li Honghe asked subconsciously. Qin Weibai did not look back. She just said blandly, to test the sword. She passed by Dongqing Hongguang, hesitated a little, slowed down her tone and said softly, Grandpa, don't worry about Minister Dongqing. The Samsara Palace will not sit back and do nothing. When the time is right we will take action. Li Honghe's body stiffened for a moment, and his expression was strange. Dongqing Hongguang's expression was even more wonderful, just like Zhou Yuanshan when he heard Qin Weibai call him brother-in-law. But the old master's feelings were obviously more complicated. After Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi got married, they would definitely call him grandpa. But the problem was that Li Tianlan had never called him that before, but Qin Weibai called him that naturally. The old master's face turned red, and he looked like he wanted to laugh wildly. But because of Li Honghe, he felt that it was a little inappropriate. For a moment, his face twisted and he looked extremely embarrassed. Thank you. Dongqing Hongguang rubbed his hands and finally couldn't help laughing. Qin Weibai nodded and went down the mountain silently. A black shadow flashed. Military counselor appeared behind Qin Weibai and followed her quietly. A sword light suddenly appeared on the calm and sunny West Lake. In silence, the whole West Lake was constantly shaking. Large waves of water rushed up to the sky violently but silently, reaching thousands of meters. The sword light was like a dragon, hovering and shooting over West Lake. The colorful light surrounded the waves that rose into the sky, and it was incomparably gorgeous. The void behind Qin Weibai shook slightly, and everyone felt the joy and appreciation of the sword. Military counselor was stunned for a moment, and then became extremely surprised. This guy is really, he made it? Qin Weibai chuckled and said, now he is really the strongest supermaster in the samsara. The colorful sword light in the air rose with the waves and fell in an instant. Except for that, there was nothing unusual. Qin Weibai frowned and whispered, although he broke through, his injury got worse. How could it be? Military counselor was a little stunned. Qin Weibai shook her head. He is still not prepared enough. He can enter the invincible realm not because he is well prepared, but because he understands that sword move. She paused and continued, send him back to Mount Shu. Don't worry about me. But boss, now you, military counselor wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Qin Weibai shook her head and said, don't worry, no one can hurt me now. Until Qin Weibai's figure disappeared, Li Honghe stood there, looking in the direction she left in silence. That sword has been hidden here all the time. Haven't you ever found it? Dongqing Hongguang hesitated several times and finally couldn't help but ask the doubts in his heart. Li Honghe shook his head and suddenly said, what kind of sword do you think it is? How would I know? Dongqing Hongguang thought of the incredible sword light and shook his head with a wry smile. Yeah, who knows? Li Honghe laughed with a complicated smile. That's Huangtu's sword. Dongqing Hongguang's face changed and he didn't speak. Li Honghe didn't speak either. In fact, there was one thing he didn't say. More than 20 years ago, he was at the peak of the invincible realm in the Li family, holding the infinite sky in his hand. But he was also at the peak of the invincible realm in the Wang family of Beihai. The sword on Qin Weibai's body was too ethereal and unpredictable. But when he felt the endless sky, he could vaguely feel the aura of the human sovereign from the sword, which seemed to be there but not there. Chapter 537. When the situation in Eastern Europe gradually became clear, the final maneuver of the two academies in Jianghu state, which had attracted the most attention and the least attention in recent years, finally came to an end. In previous years, the final maneuvers of the two academies were like a line. From the bottom to the top, all kinds of maneuvers emerged one after another, which was wonderful. This time, the final maneuver of the two academies was also in the same line, but it was from top to bottom. After the first day of the competition between the heavenly talents, although the following maneuvers were occasionally interesting, compared with the first day they were dull and boring. Therefore, from the second day onwards, fewer and fewer people came to the Sky Academy to watch the ceremony. First, a few heavyweight high-ranking officials left, and then several powerful patriarchs of wealthy families left one by one. The maneuver had continued until now. Although there were still many people in the Sky Academy compared with previous years, it was a little pitiful. Most importantly, most of the people who stayed here were not important people. They were either representatives of some organization or spokesperson of some wealthy family. The real big shots had already left. Except for Gu Xingyun. After all, no matter what, this was a grand event for the special warfare system of Jianghu state. Therefore, as the god of war of Jianghu state, Gu Xingyun had to stay in the Sky Academy and could not leave until the maneuver was completely over. Time passed day by day. Everyone found that Gu Xingyun's face was getting paler and paler, and his eyes were getting gloomier and gloomier. It was not a big problem for them to watch the maneuver in the open air in midsummer. Just as experts in the fire-flaming realm were not afraid of the common cold winter, experts in the ice-condensing realm were not worried about the heat in midsummer. However, Gu Xingyun was extremely embarrassed in midsummer. It was fine for the first few days, but as time went on, he began to sweat more and more. His entire body felt as if he had just been fished out of the water. Finally, some elites of Kunlun City realized that something was wrong and secretly helped Gu Xingyun to disperse the heat, but his performance had been seen by others. The rumor that Gu Xingyun had fallen into the invincible realm after being seriously injured by setting sun also spread. In the last few days before the end of the final maneuver, Gu Xingyun simply did not show up. He just sent an ordinary high-level official of Kunlun City to the Sky Academy to deal with things. Therefore, all kinds of rumors became more and more intense. There were more and more speculations about Gu Xingyun's current state in all circles of Jianghu state. Some people had even taken the initiative to visit Gu Xingyun, wanting to test his current state. But Gu Xingyun was no longer in the Sky Academy. Few people thought that Gu Xingyun did not show up because he was angry. But no one thought that Gu Xingyun left the Sky Academy to entertain guests. In a private box that was not the most luxurious but not the most luxurious in the suburban clubhouse, when Wang Qinglei, who had secretly come to Huading, took the teacup handed by Gu Xingyun, he could even clearly feel the slight trembling of Gu Xingyun's arm. His Highness's physical condition is very poor. Wang Qinglei took a sip of tea. He said with a smile. He didn't even have the chance to dodge the setting sun's attack. How good can his condition be? Gu Xingyun laughed at himself. His face was so pale that it was almost transparent. Even the extremely sufficient air conditioning in the box could not evaporate the sweat on his face. He sat there, and even his breathing was somewhat uncontrollably disordered. The rumors outside? Wang Qinglei probed. It seems to be very disadvantageous to your highness. Nonsense. Gu Xingyun waved his hand hard and took a few deep breaths. Then he looked at Wang Qinglei and said with a faint smile, Secretary Wang, do you also think that I have fallen from the invincible realm and can't make any progress in my life? How is it possible? Wang Qinglei laughed and said, If I really think so, I won't come today. Gu Xingyun nodded and said, Don't pay attention to some mediocre people's opinions. It's true that I'm seriously injured. To be honest, this can be said to be the heaviest injury in my life. I've tried to control it, but so far all my efforts have failed. That's why I see you today. After leaving here, I won't return to the Sky Academy, but directly leave Huading to recuperate. Secretary Wang, our cooperation will not change. When I recover from my injury, I will be 100% able to make further progress, which will also be conducive to our big plan. Wang Qinglei nodded and said in a softer voice, At present, many things have been started, but if the time is ripe, we can't rush. I can still afford to wait for a few years. A few years. Thinking of Wang Qinglei's age, Gu Xingyun was lost in thought for a moment. Wang Qinglei lowered his head and drank the tea silently. When he finished a cup of tea, he said calmly, The Heaven Punishment Troop has gone to Eastern Europe. Gu Xingyun, who didn't know what he was thinking, was suddenly shocked and subconsciously repeated, The Heaven Punishment Troop? Wang Qinglei nodded slowly. Gu Xingyun's face was a little gloomy, but before he could figure it out, Wang Qinglei dropped another bombshell. The Beihai Corps has been secretly mobilizing recently. At present, according to the information I have, at least more than 10,000 elites of the Beihai Corps have left Beihai. Gu Xingyun's face became more and more gloomy. Everyone knew that the Border Control Corps was the most elite army in Jianghu state. Because in many people's common sense, there was no Beihai Corps at all. The Beihai Corps was not a secret. However, this corps with more than 300,000 troops, from the recruitment to the appointment of generals, was all decided by Mount Dibing. The Beihai Corps nominally belonged to Jianghu state, but in fact, it was equivalent to the private army of the Beihai Corps. Everyone knew that the Beihai Corps was very strong. But no one knew how strong the Beihai Corps was. The entire Beihai Corps was only responsible to Mount Dibing, and it even had the power to refuse the transfer orders of the military headquarters. After the collapse of the Li family, the Southeast Group suffered a great loss. At that time, Wang Tianzong had not reached the top of the divine list, and the entire Wang family of Beihai was in a dormant state. When Wang Tianzong reached the top of the divine list, the Special Warfare Group also began to take shape. Gu Xingyun and the Prince Group teamed up and pushed Qi Beizong to the position of Minister of the Army Headquarters. As a result, the relationship between the Beihai Corps and the Army Headquarters was even worse. Qi Beizong was also sensible. The orders of the Army Headquarters had never been issued to the Beihai Corps. Now that Qi Beizong had retired and Dongqing Wudi had come up, the relationship between the Army Headquarters and the Beihai Corps was also extremely bad. The Army Headquarters had never ordered the Beihai Corps. This was a large modern elite army stationed in the North Sea province, spanning across all military branches, capable of displaying super combat strength in any environment, and equipped with world-class armaments. In terms of foundation, the more than 300,000 troops stationed in Beihai province were the most powerful foundation of the Wang family of Beihai. They were like the most powerful sword of the Wang family of Beihai, and this sword had been hidden in the scabbard for more than 10 years. This time, Wang Tianzong mobilized the Beihai Corps to march into Eastern Europe. How strong could these more than 10,000 elites be? Gu Xingyun looked at Wang Qinglei and stopped talking. I don't know. Wang Qinglei shook his head and said, "The recent military exercises of the Beihai Corps have been secretive, but it is certain that the combat capability of the Beihai Corps will not be inferior to that of the Border Control Corps. The overall strength was not inferior to that of the Border Control Corps. Then the most elite soldiers would naturally not be inferior to the Thunderbolt Battalion." Gu Xingyun's face became more and more ugly. "What else?" "The Shanghai combat team has entered standby," Wang Qinglei said in a calm tone. The corner of Gu Xingyun's mouth twitched fiercely, and he couldn't say a word for a while. The Shanghai combat team did not belong to the Beihai Corps. On the surface, it did not even belong to the Wang family of Beihai. But it was also the core institution of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the trump card of the Wang family of Beihai in aerial combat. A total of 200 cutting-edge fighter jets were all matched with top pilots who had served in Jianghu state for more than 10 years. Whether it was the number of fighter jets or the aerial combat technology, the Wang family of Beihai was the strongest among the major forces. Even the army headquarters of Jianghu state did not have several of the most cutting-edge fighter jets of the Shanghai combat team. With the existence of the Shanghai combat team, the Wang family of Beihai's airstrike ability was unparalleled in the world. The heaven-chasing troop, the Beihai Corps and the Shanghai combat team. What was Wang Tianzong doing? "You're afraid?" Wang Qinglei looked at Gu Xingyun seriously and said. Gu Xingyun took a deep breath and said coldly, "Such a Wang family of Beihai is indeed awe-inspiring, but what can it do? The situation in Eastern Europe has gradually become clear. It is impossible for Wang Tianzong to mobilize such a force into Eastern Europe to attack the Snowdance Corps. It's really impossible." Wang Qinglei nodded and said, "At present the 5 countries in Eastern Europe have fallen into Li Tianlan's hands. But there are more than 5 countries in Eastern Europe. Snow Country is no worse than the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. What Wang Tianzong wants is the whole of Eastern Europe." Gu Xingyun had already thought of something, but he still said stubbornly, "So what? Let's see what other forces are in Eastern Europe at present." Wang Qinglei said blandly, "First of all, the Vatican. Even if Arcis is injured, the Vatican will not retreat, because the Eastern Church has suffered heavy losses. This is the best chance for the Vatican to occupy Eastern Europe. Secondly, the Purgatory of Heaven capital. You and I know who that person in the Purgatory of Heaven capital is. With that person's temperament, now that he has East Island as his foundation, he can't retreat in the face of Tianzong. Then the Samsara Palace. The life and death of the master of Samsara Palace are unknown, but together with the Qin clan, they also have the power to reverse the situation in Eastern Europe. Also, the Snowdance Corps has suffered heavy losses. After all, Li Tianlan is young and he is one with Jianghu state, so the threat is the lowest. Finally, the Wang family of Beihai. For example, the Heaven Punishment Troop, the Shanghai Combat Team, the Beihai Corps, and Tianzong himself. Now he can break through at any time and reproduce the unparalleled martial arts of our ancestors. Your Highness, if he succeeds in breaking through, who do you think can stop him from the Vatican, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Samsara Palace and the Qin clan?" Gu Xingyun was silent. "To tell you the truth, no one can stop him." Wang Qinglei said with a smile, "Tianzong will sweep away all enemies and the Beihai Corps will deter Eastern Europe. Once Eastern Europe falls into the hands of the Wang family of Beihai, you know what will happen." "I don't know." Gu Xingyun's indifferent tone was filled with irritation that was hard to hide. Wang Qinglei glanced at him with some mockery in his eyes. "Well, just pretend that you don't know. Eastern Europe is too big. The territory of Snow Country alone is larger than that of Jianghu state. Such a large territory means great benefits. If the Wang family of Beihai takes it, what will it use to defend it? The Arctic Ocean Command can't be defended." Gu Xingyun squeezed the cup in his hand and said expressionlessly, "The Arctic Ocean Command can send more troops." "Send more troops? Dongqing Wudi of the army headquarters can't pass. If the Li family can take down the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, the giant group and the Li family will inevitably try their best to plunder the interests of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. Since the situation is stable, why should Dongqing Wudi intervene in the internal affairs of the Wang family of Beihai?" Wang Qinglei said softly with a smile, "So, if Eastern Europe falls into the hands of Tianzong, then Tianzong can only defend it with the power of the special warfare system." A drop of sweat fell down Gu Xingyun's face. If the Wang family of Beihai used the power of the special warfare system to defend Eastern Europe, it must transfer power from the special warfare system of Jianghu state. And it was foreseeable that this power would not obey Gu Xingyun's power. If Eastern Europe fell into the hands of the Wang family of Beihai, it was equivalent to falling into the hands of Jianghu state. The power to guard Eastern Europe was naturally the power of the special warfare system of Jianghu state. Once this power was formed, it was bound to surpass Kunlun City. At that time, who would recognize the position of Kunlun City as the special warfare center? Wang Tianzong was plotting against Eastern Europe, but what he swallowed was the right to speak of the entire special warfare system of Jianghu state, which was also the foundation of Kunlun City's foothold. Gu Xingyun opened his mouth, and the great pressure almost made him breathless. He took a deep breath, but the sound he made was harsh even to himself. If everything goes well, Kunlun City will be destroyed in less than 10 years. In such a situation, don't you plan to do something, Your Highness? Wang Qinglei asked in a leisurely tone. What can I do? Gu Xingyun smiled bitterly. Not to mention that Wang Tianzong could break through at any time. Even before he broke through, he was no match for Wang Tianzong. As for the foundation, Beihai Corps, Songhai Sea Troop, Gu Xingyun couldn't provide any. Not to mention Kunlun City, which had only risen for 20 years, even other superpowers in the dark world, who dared to compete with the Wang family of Beihai in terms of foundation. The only thing I can provide is the Frost Force. Gu Xingyun's voice was hoarse. The Frost Force was the super force of Kunlun City. Its number was not as large as the Heaven Punishment Force, and even its strength was slightly inferior. But it was already the most powerful trump card of Kunlun City. Wang Qinglei looked at Gu Xingyun thoughtfully. Gu Xingyun gradually calmed down and said calmly, "What's your suggestion?" "Eastern Europe is of great interest." Wang Qinglei said indifferently, "As long as Tianzong takes over Eastern Europe, he can legitimately transfer the power of the special warfare system of Jianghu state, which is the foundation of destroying Kunlun City. And it's easy to stop him from doing so. You need to give a reason to stop Tianzong from transferring the special warfare force." Reason? It's also a benefit. It's big enough to be comparable to the benefit of all of Eastern Europe. Are you kidding me? Gu Xingyun said angrily, in the current situation, what is more important than the benefit of all of Eastern Europe? Wang Qinglei looked at Gu Xingyun with a strange look in his eyes. Of course there are such benefits. He said slowly, the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, aren't they? The 5 countries in Eastern Europe. Gu Xingyun's body shook slightly. If you take over the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, you can transfer the power of the special warfare system before Tianzong. When the power of the special warfare system of Jianghu state is empty to a certain extent, Tianzong can't find the person he wants, and Jianghu state won't allow him to mess around. Then he has to find a way himself. Wang Qinglei's voice was clear and light. But to do this there is a prerequisite. Gu Xingyun did not speak. He knew very well what the so-called prerequisite was. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe were still in his hands. If Gu Xingyun wanted to intervene, there were theoretically 2 possibilities. First, Kunlun City would pay a huge price to join hands with Li Tianlan. But whether Li Tianlan was willing or not, let alone the possibility of Kunlun City and the Li family joining hands. Even if they succeeded, the power Gu Xingyun sent might be more powerful than Li Tianlan. As for the second, it was naturally to kill Li Tianlan. There might be 2 possibilities, but there was only one choice. If you kill Li Tianlan, you can get the 5 countries in Eastern Europe and have the qualification to continue to play with Tianzong in Eastern Europe. Wang Qinglei said softly. But Li Tianlan is the marshal of Jianghu state. Gu Xingyun's voice was cold. Do you want me to betray my country? He also wanted to kill Li Tianlan. But now the situation in Wulan state was stable. Even Wang Tianzong had to give up. How could he dare to touch Li Tianlan? You need a sword to kill. Wang Qinglei said lightly, you don't have to do it yourself. Isn't there another sword in Kunlun City? Gu Xingyun's face grew paler. Kunlun City did have a sword. That sword was also in Eastern Europe. But more than 20 years ago, that sword dragged the Li family from the clouds into the dust. This time, could she still destroy the Li family? The sword has come out of the mountain, Gu Xingyun said bitterly. What can I do? If you really can't do anything, why did you let her come out of the mountain that day? Wang Qinglei said meaningfully, in the end you just can't bear to do it. Gu Xingyun was silent. They all knew who the sword belonged to. Li Shi, the wife of the governor of Kunlun City. But if she really killed Li Tianlan, it was equivalent to treason. If Kunlun City wanted to get rid of the relationship, it had to give up Li Shi completely. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth, and his eyes suddenly became extremely crazy. It's not enough. He looked at Wang Qinglei and said word by word, the 5 countries in Eastern Europe are not enough. Wulan State's geographical location was extremely important, and it was a place that all soldiers would fight for. But compared to the whole of Eastern Europe, its weight was still a little less. It was really not enough. Wang Qinglei's eyes were unfathomable. But with East Island it's enough. The door was pushed open silently. The crisp sound of wooden clogs stepping on the ground could be heard clearly. A middle-aged man walked into the room calmly, looked at Gu Xingyun with a smile and said, "Your Highness, long time no see." There seemed to be a flash of knife light suddenly flashing in the extremely cool private room. Gu Xingyun's eyes suddenly became extremely deep. "Tianhai Wuji," he said word by word. One of the invincible realm grandmasters of East Island, Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace. He looked at Wang Qinglei then at Tianhai Wuji and was silent for a long time. "It's not enough to kill Li Tianlan and take down the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. What if I kill Deity and take down the whole East Island?" Wang Qinglei smiled. As far as I know, the sword of Kunlun City is very sharp." Chapter 538. The tea on the table was cold. The remaining fragrance dissipated. Tianhai Wuji had left for a while. He came and left in a low profile. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, the invincible realm grandmaster of East Island came to Jianghu State for the first time. No one knew what he talked about with Gu Xingyun and Wang Qinglei. Gu Xingyun bowed his head and played with the teacup in his hand, silent. All the conditions had been negotiated. Next it was up to him to make a decision. "Your Highness, what are you still hesitating for?" Wang Qinglei asked. His smile was still indifferent and gentle, the same as when he first entered the box. "If you are asked to give up a combat capability at the peak of the invincible realm, will you hesitate?" Gu Xingyun frowned and asked rudely. Li Shi was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm. Even if she barely entered the peak of the invincible realm, she was still the top expert and the sharpest sword in Kunlun City before Gu Xingyun made another breakthrough. Even if this sword was not very useful. But not useful and not usable were two different things. Not to mention the countless entanglements and grievances between Li Shi and Kunlun City, no one was willing to give up this combat capability. "It depends on what happens." Wang Qinglei said calmly, "If Tianzong gets Eastern Europe he will definitely not let you and Kunlun City go. If Li Tianlan uses the 5 countries in Eastern Europe as the foundation, the Li family will also develop rapidly. The key is Li Tianlan himself. In his current state in less than 5 years, you may not be his opponent now. Within 10 years in his peak period even if you make a breakthrough, you may be like an ant in front of him. For such an opponent, no matter how much you pay as long as you can kill him, it's worth it." An expert at the peak of the invincible realm is indeed rare, but Li Shi, well, even if you love her, her weight will not be greater than the future of Kunlun City. Of course you have other ways such as finding someone else to kill Li Tianlan or even Deity. Gu Xingyun's pale face looked a little helpless, bitter and even painful. The time for Kunlun City to rise was too short. Without foundation, it would be very weak at many critical moments. At least in dealing with Li Tianlan, there were too few people in Kunlun City who could do it. Gu Xingyun was seriously injured. Gu Qinshuan's arm was broken. In Kunlun City, only Li Shi was qualified and had the strength to deal with Li Tianlan or even Deity. "Your Highness, as far as I know, you don't have many choices right now. Since the emergence of the Li family, Kunlun City's status in Zhongzhou State seems unchanged, but in fact, it has been declining. Now, even a junior dares to stand on the opposite side of Kunlun City. If you don't fight now, when do you want to wait?" Wang Qinglei said patiently. Gu Xingyun was silent for a long time this time. Amidst the suffocating silence, he finally nodded and slowly said, "I understand." Wang Qinglei smiled. His smile was very satisfied. "Since that's the case, I'll wait for news from your Highness." He stood up as if intending to leave. "What do you think about Jianghu?" Gu Xingyun suddenly said. Wang Qinglei had just said that even a junior dared to stand against Kunlun City. The so-called junior was not Li Tianlan. It was Jianghu. A junior who had just entered the thunder-shocking realm reached the top overnight, broke through constantly, and went straight to the half-step invincible realm. Today, among the young generation of Zhongzhou State, if Li Tianlan was the well-deserved first, then Jiang Shangyu could be said to be the second. Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan were still growing. Even Di Jiang, the new commander of the Border Control Corps who was equally dazzling in Zhongzhou State, was ranked behind Jiang Shangyu because of his age. After the breakthrough, Jiang Shangyu changed his usual low-key manner. Gu Fengbue and Mo Qingping, who announced Jiang Shangyu's appointment on behalf of Zhongzhou State, were almost destroyed by the power storm brought by Jiang Shangyu's breakthrough before the helicopter landed. Gu Fengbue, the deputy governor of Kunlun City, seemed to have said something too much. As a result, he was seriously injured by Jiang Shangyu with one punch. Gu Fengbue was still in the Jiang family. The Jiang family said that Governor Gu was healing, but people with a discerning eye knew that it was a disguised house arrest. No one knew why Jiang Shangyu did this, but they all knew the meaning behind it. After the maneuver of the two academies, Li Tianlan's rise seemed unstoppable. Kunlun City, which lacked foundation, could only try its best to cultivate new blood. Jiang Shangyu was Gu Xingyun's target. He even planned to marry his daughter, Li Qingqing, to Jiang Shangyu so that Jiang Shangyu could assist Gu Hanshan to fight against Li Tianlan in the future. But now it seemed that Jiang Shangyu had completely turned against Kunlun City. There was no sign and there was no reason at all. And the Jiang family, which was getting closer and closer to the Special Warfare Group, now had a subtle position. For Kunlun City, this was undoubtedly an extremely dangerous signal. Kunlun City was the Special Warfare Center of Zhongzhou State. If a newly broken Invincible Realm expert could ignore Kunlun City, then what weight did Kunlun City have in Zhongzhou State and the whole Dark World? But the key was that Gu Xingyun was seriously injured and Gu Qianchuan had not recovered. Li Shi was still far away in Eastern Europe. In the entire Kunlun City, there was really no one who could suppress Jiang Shangyu in terms of force. Gu Xingyun could only take advantage of the situation. He had to make Jiang Shangyu and the entire Jiang family pay the price. Kunlun City was in a bad situation now. But the worse the situation was, the more he couldn't retreat. He had to make his voice heard. Jiang Shangyu? Wang Qinglei hesitated. He should set off for Eastern Europe today, right? Gu Xingyun's face became more and more gloomy. As soon as Gu Fengbue was seriously injured, he received the news and asked the Jiang family to give a reasonable explanation. But until now, the Jiang family had not given him any answer. The Jiang family didn't give him any answer. Jiang Shangyu, who was in Yuzhou at this time, seemed to know nothing about it. Arrogant. Gu Xingyun said in a cold tone. The Jiang family really thinks that no one can control Jiang Shangyu when he reaches the half-step invincible realm. They should be taught a lesson, a painful lesson. This is my mistake. Wang Qinglei said blandly, I didn't expect Jiang Shangyu's attitude to change, but I also overestimated the relationship between the Jiang family and Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun gave him a cold look and said nothing. Wang Qinglei's words were tantamount to questioning his ability to control, and even blaming him for not controlling the Jiang family. He waved his hand and said impatiently, It's meaningless to say this now. It's meaningless to do anything now. Wang Qinglei said, Jiang Shangyu will go to Eastern Europe today. What can we do? Remove him from his position? Replace him at the last minute? In any case, we have to wait for him to come back. He paused and continued, and the Jiang family is very close to you. This is also your internal affairs. My identity is special, so it's not good for me to intervene. Gu Xingyun sneered and didn't speak. He finally understood what Wang Qinglei meant. Obviously, the other party would not intervene in Jiang Shangyu's matter at all. He picked up the teacup in front of him and said coldly, I won't see you out. Wang Qinglei nodded and turned to leave. A well-behaved black Passat stopped in front of the club. Wang Qinglei opened the door and got in. After a moment of silence, he said slowly, Go to the garden party. Gu Xingyun quietly watched the black Passat leave without saying a word. Everything in Kunlun City was not going well recently, but everything was natural, and there was no atmosphere of suspicion. But somehow Gu Xingyun could always smell a faint smell of conspiracy. He felt a little uneasy, but he didn't know where all this came from. The Jiang family's sudden fallout undoubtedly completely exposed the weakness of Kunlun City. Jiang Shangyu, who had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, seriously injured the deputy governor of Kunlun City, and the whole Kunlun City could do nothing to him. Gu Xingyun was very clear that if he didn't make a strong response to this matter, the Jiang family's fallout would become a signal. When Kunlun City was at its weakest, everyone would come to trample on it. Gu Xingyun silently walked back to his seat and picked up the teacup. He still hadn't figured out why Jiang Shangyu suddenly fell out. Recommending him to be the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps was indeed to make use of him. But although this appointment was dangerous, it was also an opportunity. Even if the danger was greater than the opportunity, the Jiang family usually kept a low profile, and it would not make the two sides fall out. Jiang Shangyu's fallout directly disrupted his plan. As a young man whom he was very optimistic about, this appointment not only did not bring the relationship between him and the Jiang family closer, but also made Kunlun City one more enemy in the future. Gu Xingyun rubbed his forehead and let out a long sigh, but he became more and more agitated. The door was pushed open from the outside. Gu Xian, the first deputy minister of the personnel department of Kunlun City, came in. Looking at Gu Xingyun's gloomy face, he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. What's wrong? Gu Xingyun frowned and asked aloud. Your Highness, in this year's maneuver of the two academies, all the students have been assigned. Gu Xian held a piece of information in his hand, and his face was a little pale. He was the first deputy minister of the personnel department, a real high-level official in Kunlun City. In the maneuver of the two academies, he could completely represent Kunlun City in recruiting talents. But thinking of the information in his hand, he became more and more nervous. Gu Xingyun reached out his hand. Gu Xian hesitated for a moment and handed over the information in his hand. The information was not thick. There were more than 2,000 students in the two academies, but only 300 of them could really catch the attention of Kunlun City. And these 300 people could catch the attention of Kunlun City. Naturally, they could also catch the attention of other institutions and forces in Jianghu State. Every time the maneuver of the two academies came to this time, it was a feast and an opportunity for the major forces to absorb new blood. As the special warfare center of Jianghu State, Kunlun City could divide up the most talents in every maneuver of the two academies in previous years. But this time, Gu Xingyun looked at the information in his hand. His breathing became more and more rapid and he looked extremely irritable. Where are they? He quickly flipped through the information in his hand, but before he flipped through half of it, he couldn't help raising his head and looking at Gu Xian. Gu Xian smiled bitterly. They're all on the first page. Oh, the first page. Gu Xingyun nodded expressionlessly. Only 12? Only 12 out of more than 300 invitations. His voice suddenly rose. What's wrong with you? Among the students of the two academies, only 12 people are willing to join Kunlun City? 12 people. It was no longer a matter of how many. Kunlun City had never given up the layout in the two academies, and the internal students had also formed several young forces. But these people added up were more than 12. Now this list not only showed that Kunlun City almost didn't recruit any talents this time, but also showed that some people who originally intended to join Kunlun City had changed their choice in the end. Give me an explanation. Gu Xingyun slammed the list in his hand on the tea table. Look at the last page. Gu Xian smiled bitterly and didn't even dare to raise his head. Gu Xingyun directly turned to the last page of the information. Densely packed appointments appeared on the paper. At a rough count, there were at least 100 names. But there were only 2 forces on this page. Gu Xingyun subconsciously gasped and didn't speak for a long time. There were 2 forces on the last page and one of them was the East Emperor Palace. The East Emperor Palace doesn't mean to recruit people now. Maybe there are contacts in private but no one does it on the surface. But more and more people voluntarily join the East Emperor Palace. The East Emperor Palace hasn't sent any invitations so far. There are a total of 86 people, and all of them voluntarily applied to join the East Emperor Palace. At present, they are just waiting for the East Emperor Palace's reply. In addition, in the past few days, the 3000 World has sent out 50 invitations, of which 39 have been confirmed, and there are 9 people who voluntarily applied to join. Gu Xian's voice was dry. Gu Xingyun was silent. An unprecedented impact was hitting his heart with an unparalleled power. Nearly half of the 300 people had volunteered to join the 2 emerging forces, the East Emperor Palace and the 3000 World. And these 300 people were the best 300 people in the 2 academies. It could also be said that they were the best 300 people in the special warfare system of Jianghu State in recent years. What did this mean? The East Emperor Palace had Li Tianlan. The 3000 World had Jiang Shangyu. The 2 of them were the Marshal and Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Both of them had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. Even if the Snowdance Corps was disbanded after the chaos in Eastern Europe, the treatment they received must be worthy of their strength. If these people could enter the East Emperor Palace, the treatment they received would not be much worse than that in Kunlun City. The key was that the 3000 World and the East Emperor Palace were both emerging forces. Emerging forces also meant more opportunities. Gu Xingyun was in a daze. Is there any news from Jiang Shangyu? After a long time he suddenly asked. Kunlun City was still waiting for the Jiang family's explanation. But the Jiang family did not explain at all. No. Gu Xian shook his head. Our people went to see Jiang Shangyu but they didn't see him. How arrogant you are. Gu Xingyun sneered and gritted his teeth. Contact Jiang Shangyu now. I want to have a video call with him. Gu Xian nodded, took out his mobile phone and started dialing as soon as possible. 5 minutes later, Gu Xingyun took the initiative to make a video call. On the huge screen the video was quickly connected. Jiang Shangyu, dressed in military uniform, appeared on the screen. His face was calm and peaceful. Your Highness. Gu Xian's face changed. In this indifferent greeting he could only hear arrogance. Extreme arrogance. Gu Xingyun's eyes also became ferocious for a moment, and then he calmed down. He nodded and said, "This military uniform is good. It suits you very well." Really? Jiang Shangyu smiled. I think so too. What's the matter, Your Highness? Please hurry up. The private plane is ready. I will leave for Eastern Europe in 15 minutes. Okay. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth. Then I'll make a long story short. I just talked to Qianchuan. He will go to Beijing to pick him up in person. What do you think? It's a good thing. Jiang Shangyu said calmly, Lord Fengbua is seriously injured and really needs someone to take care of him. I have no problem with that. General, you are so confident. Gu Xingyun bent down and said coldly, do you think that you can do whatever you want when your combat power reaches the invincible realm? Kunlun City's current force is indeed weak, but it doesn't mean that the Special Warfare Group can't do anything to a mere Jiang family. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes slightly and said in the same calm tone, Really? Gu Xingyun also seemed to feel that his attitude was too violent. He softened his tone and said in a deep voice, You know, young man, I have always been very optimistic about you. This time, I hope it is a misunderstanding, but I want an explanation. Tell me, what is the reason for you to attack Gu Fengbua? His voice was low and majestic, full of oppression. Gu Xian looked at Gu Xingyun in surprise. At this moment, Gu Xingyun's posture was very high, but in fact he had already lowered his posture. If Jiang Shangyu still couldn't give a reason, there was no doubt that the Jiang family in Kunlun City would become hostile at the first time. On the contrary, if Jiang Shangyu gave a reason, no matter what nonsense it was, Gu Xingyun would be willing to accept it and try to win over Jiang Shangyu and the Jiang family again. In the future he would also show the corresponding respect to Jiang Shangyu. Gu Xingyun only needed a reason. No matter what the reason was, as long as there was a way out. Gu Xingyun stared at Jiang Shangyu's eyes. He believed that Jiang Shangyu could understand what he meant. But he became more and more uneasy. In Jiang Shangyu's eyes, he could not see the slightest seriousness and thinking, only indifference. After a long time Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled. His smile became more and more arrogant, with a kind of overwhelming arrogance. Reason? No reason. No reason? Gu Xingyun's voice was low. If there is no reason, why did you seriously injure Gu Fengbua? Nothing. Jiang Shangyu said blandly, it's just that my wings have hardened. All of this was because Jiang Shangyu felt that his wings had hardened. It was straightforward, clear and frank. It was the real truth. Gu Xingyun's face suddenly turned red. He suddenly stood up and threw the cup in his hand against the wall. In an instant, everything around Gu Xingyun flew out. Everything around him was thrown away. The tea table, the tea set, the remote control, everything was smashed by him. Jiang Shangyu quietly watched Gu Xingyun's behavior in rage without saying a word. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were red. He reached out to point at the screen and his voice was shrill and furious. Jiang Shangyu, do you really think that there is no one in Kunlun City? Jiang Shangyu looked at him and was silent for a while. Then he nodded and said, Yes, I just think that there is no one in Kunlun City. Chapter 539. When the Black Passat was about to drive out of the center of Huading, Wang Qinglei also got the list of students in the maneuver of the two academies. Hundreds of names from different organizations were sent through the mail. It was dazzling. The Passat drove very smoothly. Wang Qinglei opened the notebook and looked at the information seriously and attentively. There were more than 2,000 students in the two academies. In a sense, these were the most outstanding people in the special warfare system of Jianghu State in the past 3 years. In 3 years, the hundreds of names that finally entered the eyes of the major forces were naturally the most dazzling people in the special warfare system of Jianghu State in the past 3 years. The two academies held a term every 3 years. In terms of time, thousands of people would enter the eyes of the major forces every 3 terms, and then be recruited by the major forces and agencies. 3 terms of graduates, that was 10 years. In the past 10 years, the final choice of thousands of students directly affected the pattern of the special warfare system of Jianghu State in the future. Which force and agency would rise in the future, in a sense, could be seen just by looking at the list. Therefore, the maneuver of the two academies was a grand event and a feast. The most outstanding hundreds of students in each term were the targets of various special warfare agencies and hidden forces in Jianghu State. Kunlun City, the Wang family of Beihai, the 6th, the Special Operations Bureaus of various provinces, and various elite troops of the military. Everyone was competing. Wang Qinglei was naturally also competing. He first looked at 3 agencies. Wuxia Special Operations Bureau, Ranger Corps, Special Task Force Gale. These 3 organizations were all under Wang Qinglei's direct command. Wuxia Special Operations Bureau had fully matured and controlled all the special things in Wuxia province. The headquarters of Ranger Corps was in Jianghu province, and now it was the core component of Jianghu Special Operations Bureau. Special Task Force Gale was a talent he had discovered in recent years. Its headquarters was in Yuzhou. Although it was not famous, it was also thriving inside. Wang Qinglei searched the 3 agencies one by one. Looking at the names below the 3 agencies, he frowned slightly. Why are there so many fewer people? Wang Qinglei said to himself. It should be because of East Emperor Palace. The driver said in a dull tone. He had been driving for Wang Qinglei for more than 10 years. He was usually a man of few words, but when Wang Qinglei came to see Gu Xingyun, he didn't bring a secretary or a guard. He only brought a driver, which was enough to show his position in Wang Qinglei's heart. Wang Qinglei raised his eyebrows slightly and searched the East Emperor Palace. A row of densely packed names suddenly caused his pupils to shrink. After all, he was not Gu Xingyun and could not fully represent the Wang family of Beihai. Therefore he paid more attention to the list than Gu Xingyun. In this way, the list of applicants to join the East Emperor Palace was naturally longer than what Gu Xingyun saw. Wang Qinglei didn't count how many people there were. The exact number was no longer important. Roughly scanning the list, it was enough to see how amazing the momentum of the East Emperor Palace was now. Wang Qinglei looked at the list and was silent for a long time. It could be foreseen that as long as Li Tianlan didn't die in the next 3 years, the East Emperor Palace would develop steadily. By the next final maneuver of the 2 academies, there would only be more people applying to join the East Emperor Palace than now. If Li Tianlan could break through to the invincible realm within 3 years, then the entire 2 academies might be called the place where the East Emperor Palace developed new blood. The same was true for the next one. What about 10 years later? The East Emperor Palace would recruit more than half of the most outstanding young people in the entire Jianghu state in the past 10 years. At that time, the entire East Emperor Palace would represent a whole era. Wang Qinglei's heart suddenly palpitated. It's really a scourge. He reached out and knocked on the name of the East Emperor Palace, commenting calmly. If the Li family doesn't die, Jianghu state will be unstable. The driver's tone was a little emotional. This is something that everyone can see, but the attitude of the higher-ups has been very laissez-faire to the Li family. From this point of view, it is enough to see their dissatisfaction with Kunlun City. Wang Qinglei smiled and said calmly, in fact, no one can deny Gu Xingyun's contribution to Jianghu state as the god of war. But his style of doing things is too slick people and forces. Too smooth people and forces will always have too much room for compromise. It even means that there is no position that must be insisted on. The higher-ups are not dissatisfied with Kunlun City, but they don't trust him. How unyielding was the Li family in the past? They would rather die than retreat and break than bend. This is the candidate that Jianghu state needs and dares to trust. Li Honghe is still alive and well, which can also explain this problem. The driver shook his head, clicked his tongue and said nothing. Kunlun City really can't do it. Wang Qinglei lowered his head to operate the laptop and dialed a video. He said flatly, but the future of Jianghu state doesn't necessarily have to depend on the Li family. The video was connected. A vast expanse of white appeared on the screen. There was no figure, only a calm and gentle voice sounded. Finished talking? Just finished. It seems that the result is good. Wang Qinglei said calmly. There was a moment of silence on the other side of the screen. The vast expanse of white was as stable as one. Gu Xingyun agreed to fight against Li Tianlan and deity? The voice on the other side of the screen asked again. He has no reason not to agree. Wang Qinglei laughed. If he refuses, the entire Kunlun city can only live for another 10 years, at most 10 years. Whether Qinzong or Li Tianlan, they will not let him go. It's good that he agreed. The voice on the screen laughed. In this way, everything you and I have secretly planned is not in vain. In this situation, there was only one person who could and was qualified to secretly plan everything with Wang Qinglei. It could only be His Majesty, who was so powerful that he could take an invincible realm expert as his disciple. Gu Xingyun did agree to let Li Shi fight against Li Tianlan and deity. Wang Qinglei said slowly, but I don't think Li Shi can really succeed, even with Tianhai Wuji's cooperation. And Lu Xing Zhangquan. His Majesty reminded him calmly. It looks like a strong lineup. Wang Qinglei nodded. But can these three people really kill deity? On the surface their strength is indeed enough. Li Shi restrains deity and Tianhai Wuji and Lu Xing Zhangquan break out with all their strength. They may not be able to kill deity. But who can stop deity when he is about to die? You can make an invincible realm expert willing to be your disciple, but you may not be able to make them die for you. Wang Qinglei hit the nail on the head. His Majesty was silent for a while. They can kill Li Tianlan and that's enough. After a while he said slowly, Li Tianlan is young after all. It's enough to kill Li Tianlan, but what about deity? Wang Qinglei asked directly. Deity? His Majesty smiled. Deity doesn't have to die. Wang Qinglei didn't speak for a long time. He thought about it seriously, then frowned and said, Deity doesn't have to die? In that case, why do we have to fight against deity? If we don't fight against deity, the 5 countries in Eastern Europe may not make Gu Xingyun make up his mind. Only East Island can make him give up Li Shi. And if we don't fight against deity, it's okay for Lu Xing Zhangquan, but why should Tianhai Wuji come? Muddy water? Now Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School are overwhelmed by the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Only by giving them a chance can they be willing to be used by us. His Majesty's voice grew softer. But they can't kill deity. Wang Qinglei said quietly. That's true. His Majesty said, but it's enough to seriously injure deity. In this way Lu Xing Zhangquan and Tianhai Wuji also have a chance to breathe. Wang Qinglei finally understood what was wrong. Between the lines, His Majesty didn't seem to take Gu Xingyun seriously at all. He was a little annoyed, lowered his voice and growled, but if deity doesn't die, the chaos in East Island that we promised Gu Xingyun before will not come true, and Gu Xingyun will have no basis for cooperation with us in the future. Li Shi killed Li Tianlan. Killed deity. Gu Xingyun would try his best to get the 5 countries in Eastern Europe as soon as possible. At that time, with the cooperation of Wuji Palace, East Island would be in chaos again. The power of Kunlun City would enter East Island and expel the purgatory of Heaven Capital. That was their plan. At least that was the plan that Wang Qinglei told Gu Xingyun. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe plus East Island. The strength of Kunlun City would soar. When Gu Xingyun recovered from his injury and reached the peak of the invincible realm, the entire Kunlun City would become stronger. Only such a prospect could make him sacrifice Li Shi. His Majesty smiled and said blandly, when did I say that I wanted to cooperate with Gu Xingyun? Wang Qinglei frowned tightly. Gu Xingyun is likely to enter the peak of the invincible realm after recovering from his injury. So what? His Majesty said blandly, let's not talk about whether he has the opportunity and time to enter the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he has the time, he may not necessarily break through. Even if he can break through, he is just another Li Shi. The peak of the invincible realm is very strong, but even if Gu Xingyun breaks through for us, he is just an ally who has his own position and may even betray us at any time. I have a lot of similar people around me. Why do I have to find Gu Xingyun? If I don't find Gu Xingyun, why do you want me to cooperate with Kunlun City? Wang Qinglei gritted his teeth. His Majesty seemed to hesitate for a while, then slowly said, Li Shi is a good sword, but it should not belong to Kunlun City. It should belong to me. Even with Wang Qinglei's shrewdness, he was shocked when he heard this sentence. It was not until this moment that he really understood what the other party meant. So, you don't want to cooperate with Gu Xingyun for Gu Xingyun? He said word by word, you want Li Shi? Yes. His Majesty said blandly, what I need is high-end combat capability, but not high-end combat capability that will betray me at any time because of interests. I need my own people, understand? My own people. Wang Qinglei took a deep breath, took out a cigarette and lit it. The cooperation between Tianhai Wuji and Kunlun City was fake. The future chaos of East Island was also fake. The most fundamental purpose of all this was to make Gu Xingyun sacrifice Li Shi, or to make Gu Xingyun make up his mind to order Li Shi to attack Li Tianlan. Li Shi could not kill deity. But she could kill Li Tianlan. And Li Tianlan was the marshal of Jianghu state. Once Li Tianlan died, there would be no place for Li Shi in the whole Jianghu state. And Kunlun city would disassociate itself from Li Shi as soon as possible. At that time, Li Shi would face a real desperate situation. Under such circumstances, if His Majesty reached out to Li Shi, what reason did Li Shi have not to shake his hand? All this plan was to kill Li Tianlan, and also for Li Shi's combat capability at the peak of the invincible realm. From the beginning to the end, Kunlun city could only play the role of being used. What His Majesty wanted was to make Gu Xingyun give up Li Shi, who was at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Qinglei held a cigarette in one hand and rubbed between his eyebrows with the other. After a long time he said slowly, "Brilliant. I'm flattered." His Majesty's voice was still gentle. "I'm not the only one in your plan, right? I wonder why Jiang Shangyu suddenly turned against Kunlun city. Do you want Jiang Shangyu to completely anger Gu Xingyun and make him feel a real sense of crisis?" Wang Qinglei asked. "Yes." His Majesty's voice was clear and light. "So, Jiang Shangyu is really your disciple?" Wang Qinglei asked curiously. "Yes." His Majesty's voice was still calm. "Li Tianlan died and Kunlun city won't live long. Wang Xingxiao will inherit the Wang family of Beihai. Jiang Shangyu is the only candidate for the future special warfare system of Jianghu state." Wang Qinglei was completely convinced. His tone was extremely sincere and he said happily, "Your Majesty, I hope we can cooperate happily." "Of course." His Majesty laughed. In the laughter, the white on the screen flickered, and the video call was immediately closed. Wang Qinglei instinctively looked at his watch. From the time the video was connected to the time it was hung up, the whole call did not exceed 3 minutes. Wang Qinglei closed the notebook and looked out of the window. Outside the window, it was already lush, with birds singing and flowers fragrant. Cicadas chirped endlessly in the quiet world. The garden party arrived. The black Passat entered the white jade gate. Wang Qinglei got out of the car and slowly went up in the garden building with a small bridge and flowing water. At the top of the garden party was a pavilion. The pavilion was not high, but it was empty. Standing here there were picturesque landscapes and bustling events. There were scenery in every direction. A slender young man stood in the pavilion. With his back to Wang Qinglei, he held the railing and looked into the distance, lost in thought. The sun shone in from outside the pavilion. He stood in the place where the shadow and the light converged, his eyes full of affection and concentration. Wang Qinglei walked to him and looked at his side profile. Every time he faced this guy who was 20 years younger than him, but it was the first time he aroused his ambition, his heart was extremely complicated. Without him, perhaps the entire Wang family of Beihai would be different now, wouldn't it? Wang Qinglei was silent for a while. He suddenly came to his senses, looked at the silent young man beside him and chuckled. "What are you looking at?" "I'm looking at what I can see." The young man's voice was low and gentle, with a very charming magnetism. "Then what do you see?" Wang Qinglei asked curiously. The young man smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. He pointed to the front and said softly, "The landscape is picturesque." Wang Qinglei followed his finger and looked over. After a long time he nodded. "Such a beautiful scene, it's really carefree." Chapter 540. As one of the senior counselors at the core level of Jianghu State, Jiang Shan was really in a high position and was deeply rooted in the entire Beijiang province. But judging from the appearance, the entire Jiang family did not look like a wealthy family at all. The manor of the Jiang family was not big, covering an area of less than 30 acres. The internal villa seemed to have been built for many years, but the manor as a whole looked very exquisite, with clear water, small gardens and flat grassland. It was not majestic but extremely fresh. Jiang Shan was usually busy with official business and rarely came here. During the period before Jiang Shangyu went to the Deep Sea Academy, in addition to a few servants, only Jiang Shangyu, who had been in poor health since he was a child, lived here for a long time. Jiang Shan occasionally came, but he came and went in a hurry. He didn't feel anything before, but it wasn't until now that he realized that he didn't seem to have observed the place where Jiang Shangyu had lived since he was a child. Every grass and tree here, every ripple in the water, and every flower in the sun were familiar yet strange. Jiang Shan felt a little emotional. It seemed that from the moment Jiang Shangyu went to Yuzhou here, he really realized that so many years had passed calmly and cruelly without any change in expression. The son he cared about but had little time to accompany had quietly taken over the heavy burden on his body and taken the Jiang family in another direction. So Jiang Shan stayed in the manor. He declined a few meetings that were not particularly important but could not be ignored, and gave a few servants a few days off. Then he began to stay in the villa and wait quietly. He was waiting for Kunlun City's attitude. The future direction of the Jiang family would be controlled by Jiang Shanyu. But Jiang Shan thought that he was not old and confused, and he could always play a big role in the future development. Jiang Shanyu seriously injured Gu Fengbue, which was equivalent to completely falling out with Kunlun City. There was no exception to what kind of attitude Kunlun City showed. According to their attitude, Jiang Shan must respond at the first time, either tough or gentle. There was not much flattery, deception, and subtle temptation here. Staying in this manner, his heart was extremely calm. Sitting here he was a father and a patriarch, not a counselor of Zhongzhou state. This was Jiang Shan's attitude. Apart from Jiang Shan, there was only one gardener left in the entire manor. The gardener was an old man in his 50s, surnamed Su. His temples were white and his face looked weathered. He was the earliest servant to come to the Jiang family and had been here for nearly 10 years. He was both a gardener and a chef. It was said that old Su's father was a very famous traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. His family had a long history of learning, and old Su was also proficient in the art of medicine, so when necessary he could also be used as a doctor. Gu Fengbue had been staying there ever since he was seriously injured. His injuries were so serious that he could not move, and the Chinese medicine he needed for his daily treatment was personally brewed by old Su. When night fell, old Su walked out of the villa with the Chinese medicine that emitted a bitter smell. After pouring the Chinese medicine into the trash can, he took a broom and started sweeping the floor. Jiang Shan, who had been staying here, raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "He still doesn't want to drink it?" Old Su shook his head and said in a stiff tone, "Maybe they don't trust us." He thought for a moment and continued, "Maybe they're afraid that we'll poison them? If we poison him here, what good will it do us? There are always a few kinds of strange poisons in the world that can kill people without spilling blood. It is said that there was a doctor in the past who was famous for using poisons. He formulated a kind of chronic poison with an incubation period of 3 years. It is colorless, odorless, and has no shape, but it can constantly weaken people's bodies. Even if they die in the end, the symptoms look like natural death. He should be afraid that we also have this kind of poison, right?" Jiang Shan smiled calmly. He was undoubtedly talking about the poison Dr. Yu Donglai. As one of the sacred guards around Li Honghe, Yu Donglai's combat capability was not very good. It could even be said that he was at the bottom of the sacred guards. But in terms of toxicology he was undoubtedly the best in the whole dark world. With the collapse of the Li family, some of the poisons he had developed were scattered in the dark world and still played a vital role in some conspiracies. "Oh," old Su said, lowered his head and continued to sweep the floor. Jiang Shan hesitated for a moment and said slowly, "I'll go and have a look." He stepped into the villa. The sky was completely dim. Jiang Shan did not turn on the lights. He calmly pushed open the door of a guest room. A very faint smell of blood slowly emanated from the room and filled the whole room. On the bed in the bedroom, there was an uncontrollable heavy gasp, like a seriously injured and dying beast. Jiang Shan stood in front of the bedroom door and looked at the figure struggling on the bed through the darkness. After a moment of silence, he said gently, "Old Gu, are your injuries better today?" "Hey hey hey hey," a low and hoarse laugh sounded with clear anger and resentment. "Thank you for your concern. Although I'm seriously injured, I won't die. At least I can wait for someone to pick me up." His words were slow and heavy, and he gnashed his teeth one word at a time. Jiang Shan said slowly, "Although the injury is not fatal, it affects the foundation, which is not good. I heard that the internal competition in Kunlun City is very cruel." "Affects the foundation?" Gu Fengbue gnashed his teeth and sneered. "Even if I become a disabled person, it's a sacrifice for Kunlun City. The whole Kunlun City will remember why I ended up like this. Jiang Shan, if I, Gu Fengbue, die here, do you really think that your Jiang family will have a good ending? Kunlun City is very big and there are more than me. Old Gu, don't get excited. It's not good for your health." Jiang Shan's voice was clear and light. "Jiang Shan, you know what you're doing. Kunlun City was your only choice and your last way out. Kunlun City gave you face but you don't want it. Then you..." Jiang Shan took a step back, ignoring Gu Fengbue's curse. He just said lightly, "Pay attention to rest." He turned around and left, closing the door behind him. The night shrouded Beijiang. The sky was high and the clouds were thin in Beijiang. At night, the stars were even more prosperous. Jiang Shan looked up at the starry sky above and was silent for a long time. Old Su was trimming the flower branches in the garden. Jiang Shan looked at the time, walked over and asked, "What do you want to eat tonight?" Old Su hesitated for a few seconds before responding. He said slowly, "There are some leftovers at noon. How about heating them up?" Jiang Shan was stunned for a moment and then he laughed. He really didn't care too much. He didn't put on airs, nor did he insist on belonging to a wealthy family. He was like this and so was Jiang Shanyu. "I have no problem. I'm afraid that the big shot inside can't get used to eating leftovers." He pointed to the villa where Gu Fengbo was. "It doesn't matter." Old Su shook his head. "I'm afraid that this big shot can't get used to the taste of Beijiang. Anyway, even if it's not leftovers, he won't eat it." Jiang Shan shook his head with a smile, but in the end he didn't say anything. He just patted Old Su on the shoulder. "Don't be busy. Have a drink with me." Old Su's ears suddenly moved, and he looked at the distant sky under the curtain of night calmly. "I still have a bottle of Maotai, which is the standard for state banquets. Let's go, let's." Jiang Shan's words paused. The whistling sound of rotors came from a distance, and the signal lights flickered slightly, and the color was blood red. The helicopter was getting closer and closer, roaring through the whole manor. There was suddenly a trace of faintly discernible sword chi in the peaceful manor. More and more sword energy scattered in the manor, spreading out layer by layer, fierce and sharp. The whole manor seemed to be enveloped by an undisguised killing intent. Jiang Shan narrowed his eyes and didn't go on. He just whispered, "There are guests coming." Old Su did not raise his head and continued to trim the flower branches. The door of the helicopter opened. A thin figure stood in front of the cabin door and fell against the strong wind. He was dressed in white, with long sleeves fluttering. This picture was not elegant. Instead, it was somewhat pitiful. Because the fluttering long sleeves fully showed that the man in white had only one skill left at this time. Jiang Shan looked at the man's broken arm and did not speak. "Your eyes are very interesting." Gu Qianchuan, dressed in white, landed on the ground. He looked at Jiang Shan's eyes and his voice became low and hoarse. The empty sleeves fluttered with the sword intent. Gu Qianchuan tilted his head and said in a cold tone, "Do I look good?" "I'm sorry, Your Highness." Jiang Shan withdrew his gaze and slowly said, "I'm impolite." "It doesn't matter." Gu Qianchuan said indifferently, "Kunlun City can afford some eyes. Kunlun City can also have some hot blood. Where is Fengbua?" Jiang Shan pointed to the villa. Gu Qianchuan's expression became more and more gloomy. He was already standing here, but Gu Fengbua did not appear, which completely showed that Gu Fengbua's injury had been so serious that it could not be more serious. Without another word he walked over. He was not on good terms with Gu Xingyun. As Gu Xingyun's confidant, Gu Fengbua was naturally not close to him. But now Kunlun City was in a special situation. A superior of the half-step invincible realm, no matter what the standpoint was, as long as the general direction was the same, Gu Fengbua had no reason not to protect him. His speed was extremely fast, and his eye-catching white clothes left a series of afterimages in the night sky. The helicopter landed on the lawn. Gu Qianchuan, dressed in white, had rushed out of the villa with Gu Fengbua on his back. Fresh blood dyed his white robe red, making it look like pieces of plum blossoms. The killing intent in Gu Qianchuan's eyes was not concealed. He could only see it with his own eyes. Only then could they see the extent of Gu Fengbua's injury. His muscles were torn, his internal organs were severely damaged and many bones were broken. Under such circumstances, it was hard to say whether Gu Qianchuan could maintain the combat capability of the half-step invincible realm, let alone go further in the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu destroyed a half-step invincible realm expert in Kunlun City. How ridiculous does that sound? But that was exactly what had happened. Several doctors on the helicopter immediately carried Gu Fengbua on a stretcher and began emergency treatment. Rescue. Gu Qianchuan's eyes were bloodshot, and he was almost crazy. The sword intent all over the manor was whistling wildly, and the killing intent was boiling. "Your Highness, are you going to attack me here?" Jiang Shan asked calmly, and at the same time he blocked Old Su behind him. This sentence seemed to remind Gu Qianchuan. The killing intent in his eyes was gradually suppressed. In any case, Jiang Shan was a senior counselor of Zhongzhou State and ranked in the corps. If he killed Jiang Shan, not to mention himself, even the entire Kunlun city could not bear it. Even if Jiang Shan now had no clear group ownership and his position was vague, Kunlun city could not bear it. A vague position would make him lose the support force behind him. But at the same time his identity was there. Without a clear position, Jiang Shan would also become the target of various groups. How to survive in such an environment was a test of Jiang Shan's wisdom. Good, very good. Gu Qianchuan took a deep breath. His body trembled in extreme anger. Kunlun City will remember what happened today. From today on, Kunlun City and the Jiang family will fight to the death. Jiang Shan looked at Gu Qianchuan expressionlessly and said calmly, "Your Highness, take care. I won't see you off." No matter how calm his expression was, it meant extreme arrogance in Gu Qianchuan's eyes. He could not bear it anymore and suddenly swung his empty sleeves. The sword energy all over the manor instantly broke out. He could not kill Jiang Shan, but with his identity who could stop him from destroying this manor? At least it was good to vent his anger. Countless sword energy turned into sword light and kept rising. But in the next second the entire manor was quiet. Gu Qianchuan's eyes widened. Jiang Shan was also surprised. Old Su, who was pruning flowers, froze in place. He stared at the flowers in front of him, his eyes full of fear. Under the cold and lonely starry sky there was light. The light appeared on the grass, in the flowers, and scattered between heaven and earth. It was a riot of colors. The sword energy driven by Gu Qianchuan disappeared in an instant. Only the dazzling colorful light kept flowing in the manor. Gu Qianchuan, Jiang Shan, and Old Su turned almost at the same time and looked at the gate of the manor. A hazy and ethereal figure stepped on the light and walked into the manor. Her footsteps were silent, dreamy, and peerless. One after another, colorful light lingered around her, half covering her face and body. The woman walked into the manor and saw Gu Qianchuan. She was a little surprised. Her voice was cold and sweet like the sound of nature. "You just lost an arm, but the sword energy is so weak. The sword of Kunlun City is just so." Gu Qianchuan was not angry. His whole body was tense, as if facing a formidable enemy. He said in a deep voice, "Qin Weibai?" Qin Weibai did not speak. There was no power fluctuation in her body. But the colorful sword light slightly flowed, and the shadow of a giant sword appeared for a moment. Faintly discernible, the vast and boundless sword qi descended from the sky. In an instant, Gu Xingyun's whole body burst with blood. Gu Qianchuan's face became extremely frightened. He roared, rose into the air, and fled the manor without looking back. There was a buzz in the air which seemed to be a giant sword breaking through the air. Qin Weibai reached out and grasped a piece of nothingness. She said calmly, "A small fry is not worth wasting energy on." She did not look at Jiang Shan and continued to move forward to the villa where Jiang Shangyu was. A ghostly figure blocked in front of the villa. He looked at the colorful light on Qin Weibai's body with a solemn face. "Old Su." Jiang Shan took a deep breath. At that moment he did not see clearly how Old Su appeared in front of Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was also looking at Old Su. She looked at the dull face in front of her, gently raised her eyebrows and said, "Wang Su?" No wonder Jiang Shangyu would fall out with Kunlun City. It turns out that he relies on Wang Qinglei. So, the whole Jiang family has entered Wang Qinglei's camp? Wang Su's face suddenly changed. The colorful light fluctuated for a moment again. Wang Su flew out directly and fell to the ground, spitting blood. When she succeeded in inviting the sword, Li Hong has said that it was a sword of the invincible realm. To be precise, this sword itself was of the invincible realm. And it was at the peak of the invincible realm. Qin Weibai had a sword in her hand. Where couldn't she go? She pushed open the door of the villa, walked in, and went directly into Jiang Shangyu's bedroom. On the desk in the bedroom was the photo that Jiang Shangyu had collected until now. Qin Weibai picked up the photo and looked at it carefully. She was silent for a long time. After a long time, she slowly opened her mouth and muttered to herself, "Is it you?" Chapter 541. The days of waiting were boring. For Li Tianlan, the rarest thing in life was boredom. It had been like this since he was a child. In less than 48 hours after the end of the trial day, Li Tianlan had completely stabilized his injury. With the dragon vein in his body, Li Tianlan did not feel that there was anything special about himself in his normal state. But once his body was injured, he could clearly feel that his body was getting better every minute and second. This feeling was indescribably wonderful, but in the eyes of others, it was enough to make their eyes turn red with jealousy. Even Tribulation, who had always been calm, was a little uneasy when he saw Li Tianlan's recovery speed. Tribulation was now in the same ward as Qin Shilai. Li Tianlan was peeling an apple with a fruit knife. His movements were serious and focused, but his sense of existence was completely void. Whether it was Tribulation or Qin Shilai, as long as they looked away, Li Tianlan would completely disappear from their perception. His body was surrounded by wisps of faint mist, which was the dragon vein constantly repairing his body's injury. The mist was almost invisible, but now the wisps of mist were more existent than Li Tianlan. Tribulation leaned against the bed and looked at Li Tianlan. With a somewhat complicated look in his eyes, he said, "Tianlan, you are now the most terrible assassin in the dark world." The meaning of these words from Tribulation's mouth was self-evident. He was the only assassin in the dark world today, and also the strongest assassin and killer in everyone's heart. But feeling Li Tianlan's current state, Tribulation really felt a little ashamed. Li Tianlan didn't enter the invincible realm, but his combat capability was not much worse. The most important thing was that he was in an illusory state all the time. In this state, if Li Tianlan didn't want to be discovered, even ordinary invincible realm experts couldn't find him. He could get close to anyone without revealing his aura or killing intent. When he broke out in an instant, death was coming. In this way, if Li Tianlan was lucky, he could even assassinate an invincible realm expert. If the target was an expert of the invincible realm, this was simply the peak in glory that all killers and assassins dreamed of. Qin Shilai, who was sitting not far away, nodded in agreement and said, "Indeed. It's just a method to kill. Why bother with your own position?" Li Tianlan smiled gently, cut the fruit in his hand into 2 pieces, handed them to Tribulation and Qin Shilai, and whispered, "Jianghu is coming." The room fell silent. Tribulation took a bite of the fruit thoughtfully. Qin Shilai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end he did not speak. Jianghu. This name, which had always been noticed in Zhongzhou state but not closely, was now the new focus of the dark world. It wasn't because of his sudden rise in status. Instead, it was because of his ability to reach the heavens in a single bound. In one day he went from the thundershocking realm to the half-step invincible realm, and even to the top of the half-step invincible realm. Everyone wanted to know how he did it. Now the whole dark world was dead silent. The invincible realm experts of the major forces were either dead or injured. Under such circumstances, the thundershocking realm and the half-step invincible realm experts, especially young experts like Li Tianlan who were only half a step away from the invincible realm, suddenly became important. The rise of Jianghu scattered the light on Li Tianlan. As for Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, they were also dim now. There was even a saying in the dark world that if this generation of young people grew up, the only one who was qualified to compete with Li Tianlan for the top in the world in the future was not Wang Xingxiao or Gu Hanshan, but Jianghu. Jianghu was expected to officially arrive in Reki City at 8 o'clock tonight. Everyone wanted to know what Li Tianlan was thinking now. "Tianlan, what do you think?" After a long time, Tribulation asked calmly. "There must be something wrong with Jianghu's martial arts. I don't think he is breaking through." Li Tianlan said quietly, "It's possible for Jianghu to reach the peak of the thundershocking realm overnight, but from the initial thundershocking realm to the half-step invincible realm," he smiled and didn't go on. There were indeed many examples of rapid progress in martial arts, but everything had its reason. Jianghu's so-called breakthrough had no reason at all. From the peak of the thundershocking realm to the half-step invincible realm, and from the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the half-step invincible realm, it seemed to be only 2 steps, but each of them was much more difficult than entering the peak of the thundershocking realm from the chi-controlling realm at the beginning. Jianghu's breakthrough this time was equivalent to a person who had never touched martial arts reaching the ordinary half-step invincible realm overnight, or even more exaggerated. This was simply impossible. His martial arts are not important now. What matters is what his arrival means. Tianlan, he is different from Qin Qingwan. At his age and the realm he shows now, there will be many people who are willing to support him at all costs to challenge your authority in Eastern Europe and the Snowdance Corps. Tribulation took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Challenge?" Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "If I were Jianghu, I would definitely not do this, and I would even try to avoid contact with me. The so-called challenge requires strength. In this realm, I am invincible and no one will be my opponent." Marshal Li is really domineering. A clear and gentle voice suddenly sounded. The door was pushed open and Gong Sun Qi, the azure dragon of Zhongzhou state in white, came in. He said with a faint smile, You and I are in the same realm now. I wonder what are the chances of Marshal Li winning against me? Or are you 100% sure to win? Gong Sun Qi, the Azure Dragon of Jianghu State. Before Li Tianlan appeared, he was recognized as the #1 expert under the Invincible Realm in the Dark World. Even though Li Tianlan now had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, not many people thought that he could challenge Gong Sun Qi's position. Li Tianlan stood up and thought about it seriously. Then he smiled calmly and said, "Senior, if you want me to win, then I can win." There were several meanings in this sentence. If he thought about it carefully, it was really long-lasting and extremely smooth. Gong Sun Qi laughed and looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes were soft and he said, "It's really rare for you to say this kind of thing." Li Tianlan waved his hand, grabbed a chair and put it beside Gong Sun Qi. On the trial day, Gong Sun Qi, who had been strictly neutral in Jianghu State, and even the four spirits had always stood firmly on the side of the Snowdance Corps and ignored the Wang family of Beihai. Whether it was for the overall situation or for something else, Li Tianlan had to accept this favor. So he was willing to call Gong Sun Qi Senior. "How are your injuries?" Gong Sun Qi sat in front of Tribulation and asked. "Not bad." Tribulation bowed slightly. Even he maintained respect in front of Gong Sun Qi. 3 years ago, in the final battle of Heaven Capital, Tribulation broke out with all his strength and killed Shinichi Miyamoto, an Invincible Realm expert in East Island. To some extent, it was also Gong Sun Qi's help to Tribulation. Gong Sun Qi nodded, glanced at Li Tianlan and said, "The president will arrive in Reki City in 3 days." Li Tianlan understood the meaning of this sentence and said calmly, "I haven't discussed this with Marshal Uncle." "What is it?" Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan in confusion. Li Tianlan frowned and thought for a while, then said slowly, "The chaos in Eastern Europe will end with the president's visit to Reki City. That is to say, it is almost over here." Tribulation nodded. This was to be expected. The chaos in Eastern Europe had developed until now. More than 10 Invincible Realm experts had died, and all the major forces were leaderless. 2 of the 4 families had changed their positions, and the other 2 had been destroyed. Jianghu State was entrenched in Wulan State and had formed a general trend to unify Eastern Europe. After the night of trial day, the situation would gradually calm down. Li Huaqing would visit Wulan State, and the 5 countries in Eastern Europe would be completely marked with the mark of Jianghu State. At that time, with Wulan State and the Arctic Ocean Command as the core, the army of Jianghu State would sweep the whole of Eastern Europe bit by bit, and the whole situation would become extremely clear. "If there is no accident, I will return to Yuzhou with President Li Huaqing to report on my work," Li Tianlan said slowly. He looked at Tribulation and said calmly, "But we can't leave this place behind." Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan and listened silently. "So when I reported to the President and Minister Dongqing, I recommended Marshal Uncle to be the new Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Only when you are here can I rest assured and you can control the situation." Li Tianlan continued. A touch of astonishment appeared on Tribulation's face. Perhaps before he said this, no one could have thought that Li Tianlan would resign as the commander of the Snowdance Corps. The rank of marshal was secondary. What mattered was everything here. If Li Tianlan did not leave, the Snowdance Corps would not leave. With the full cooperation of Prime Minister Rieker, the full support of the Arctic Ocean Command, Rekvia's obedience, and the Qin clan as an ally, Li Tianlan's foundation in Eastern Europe could be said to be unique. As long as he stayed in Eastern Europe and developed peacefully, within 10 years, Li Tianlan would truly become a pivotal figure in Jianghu State. Li Tianlan actually wanted to hand over such a good situation to him? Tribulation was confused for a moment and shook his head subconsciously. Everything he developed in Eastern Europe naturally belonged to Li Tianlan. But this was completely different from Li Tianlan's development here in person. "Why do you want to leave?" Tribulation asked suddenly. "After returning home, I will go to Tiannan and develop peacefully in Tiannan." Li Tianlan seemed to want to say something else, but when the words came to his mouth, he fell silent with a complicated look on his face. Tribulation's eyes trembled slightly for a moment, and he also fell silent. The situation in Eastern Europe was not bad. But after the storm was settled, Li Tianlan was in a hurry to leave. Obviously, Li Tianlan had a more important goal. What could be more important than Eastern Europe? Naturally, it would not be just Tiannan. After the trial day, the situation in Tiannan was already very clear in the eyes of those who were observant. There was the purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tiannan. There were also more than 100,000 troops in the Blood Battalion. And the tens of thousands of square kilometers of land that was completely free. All of these could belong to Li Tianlan. Compared with Eastern Europe, Tiannan was the real foundation of the emperor. All of this had been very vague before. But on the trial day, Li Tianlan's sword strike was enough to explain too many problems. Now no one thought about who lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan. There were only a few people at the peak of the invincible realm. The answer was easy to guess. The question now was why on earth that person lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan. The purgatory of heaven capital? Tribulation suddenly smiled with a self-deprecating smile. Li Tianlan was still silent and said nothing. How is my sister? Tribulation suddenly asked, and his voice became low and hoarse. She's fine. Li Tianlan said slowly, Rushi is with her. Tribulation closed his eyes and didn't speak for a long time. Chapter 542. In the end, Gong Sun Chi broke the silence. I have communicated with Minister Dongqing. In principle, he agrees that Black Tortoise will lead a group of terracotta army to be temporarily stationed in Reki City and return to Jianghu State after the situation is completely stabilized. Li Wangxing, the Black Tortoise of Jianghu State, could also be said to be a direct force of Li Tianlan. The achievements of the Snowdance Corps came first, and Dongqing Wudi's full support followed. Coupled with the inclination of the four spirits, the general trend had completely guaranteed Li Tianlan's foundation in Eastern Europe. As long as Tribulation was willing to stay with his status and strength as the #1 assassin in the Dark World, even if Li Tianlan left Eastern Europe, the Li family would still have absolute influence on Eastern Europe in the future. Li Tianlan looked up at Tribulation. Since Tribulation broke through in East Island more than 3 years ago, his position had become a little awkward. Today, Tribulation was the Minister of the Northeast Special Warfare Department of Jianghu State and also the Director of the Supervisory Council, which was equivalent to a Member of Parliament. He was transferred from the Northeast Special Warfare Department to the Commander of the Snowdance Corps. As long as he was given the title of Marshal, his position was also equivalent to that of a Member of Parliament of Jianghu State. It seemed to be the same, but in reality the difference was huge. After all, Sai City had been entrenched in the Northeast for many years, and its influence had long been deep-rooted. Tribulation's role in the Special Warfare Department was nothing more than icing on the cake. But once he left the Northeast, he controlled the strongest Special Warfare Battalion in Jianghu State. In addition, he was far away in Eastern Europe, so his real power could be said to be doubled. Li Tianlan was now the young governor of Sai City, which naturally belonged to the Li family. Once Tribulation stayed, it meant that Sai City had taken a crucial step in the battle with Kunlun City. 3 years ago, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, known as the twin pillars of Sai City, entered the Sky Academy and the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou respectively. Now, with the addition of Tribulation, the power of Sai City was gradually spreading beyond the Northeast with the addition of Li Tianlan. Such a move was slow, but it was so powerful that no one could refuse it. I can stay. Li Tianlan and Gong Sun Chi could put this matter in front of him, which was enough to show that Dongqing Wudi in the rear had gotten through all the joints and was only waiting for him to nod. Thank you, Marshal Uncle. Li Tianlan said softly. Tribulation shook his head and suddenly seemed to think of something. He said, So what about Jiang Shangyu? Li Tianlan and Gong Sun Chi looked at each other and said nothing. Jiang Shangyu's transfer was the most wrong thing this time. As the newly appointed Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps, his position could not be changed in the near future, which meant that he would be in Eastern Europe in the near future. But the matter in Eastern Europe was over. Why did Jianghu State transfer him from Eastern Europe? At this time, Kunlun City had completely fallen out with Jiang Shangyu. Kunlun City did not have the power to deal with Jiang Shangyu now. Even if it did, Jiang Shangyu was in Eastern Europe. However, Kunlun City was also out of their reach. As for targeting Jiang Shan? What a joke, the title of Jiang Shan Senior Counselor was not just for show. This matter is a little interesting. Tribulation said. Yes, from the moment Qin Qingwan died in Eastern Europe, all the timing seemed to be just right. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group pushed Jiang Shangyu, and Jiang Shangyu took advantage of the situation to make a breakthrough. He would stay away from Eastern Europe for the time being, so he fell out with Kunlun City. All this was too coincidental. Although there was no deliberate sign, all this seemed very strange. Li Tianlan said slowly, If I'm not mistaken, the Jiang family should have turned to the Southeast Group, or at least to Wang Qinglei. Tribulation turned his head and glanced at Qin Shilai, who had been silent. Qin Shilai shrugged slightly and pointed up. Above the Qin clan was naturally the Lin clan. Tribulation smiled, turned to look at Li Tianlan and said, "It's okay. Even if Li Tianlan left Eastern Europe, the Snowdance Corps would not move in a short time." Tribulation held the military power, had the strong support of the Qin clan, and was in the invincible realm. It was not difficult for him to suppress Jianghu. Li Tianlan was relieved and said slowly, "In that case, we will release the news that the president will arrive in Reki City in a few days." Li Huaqing's visit to Eastern Europe had been discussed after the date of death, but the diplomatic department of Zhongzhou state had never officially issued a document. The reason was naturally very simple. After the date of death, the Snowdance Corps had a great advantage in Reki City, but the advantage was not a victory. Li Huaqing naturally wanted to make the situation more stable. After the trial day, although everything could not be said to be without suspense, there would basically not be too many problems. At this time, the Snowdance Corps naturally had to cooperate with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make Li Huaqing's visit more grand. Moreover, after the trial day, almost all the major forces were in a state of no leader. The Shadow Throne was disbanded, and King Tong was disabled. The president of the Heroes Club died in battle, and the murderous weapon was lost. Jiang Qinsong was expelled from the Jiang family of South America. Huan Kong, the lord of the fantasy world, died. Cass Rotter, the leader of the Men in Black, died. The entire Dark World was facing an unprecedented reshuffle. Now, only the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican were left in Reki City. These two forces seemed to be looking for opportunities covetously. But as long as Li Huaqing came to Eastern Europe and signed an agreement with Wulan State, presumably these two forces would also feel that the general trend was over. No matter how unwilling they were, they could only withdraw from Eastern Europe. Otherwise, what awaited them was war. Li Tianlan was silent, thinking about the gains and losses after the battle. It was not easy to win this battle. The only thing Li Tianlan could be glad about was that none of the Invincible Realm experts standing beside him had died, but that was all. There were 4 Invincible Realm experts standing beside him: Qin Shilai, Raphael, Tribulation, and Situt Sangyue. Now, all 4 of the Invincible Realm experts were seriously injured. Tribulation was the one with the lightest injury. When he pestered Paul, it could be said that he had broken out his limit. So far, he was still in a state of extreme exhaustion. As for those injuries, he could barely suppress them and slowly recover. Tribulation was also the only one who could recover his combat capability in a short time. Qin Shilai's situation was a little worse than Tribulation's. He could not fight for a year and a half. Situt Sangyue's situation was a little worse than Qin Shilai's. He and Raphael were in the center of the self-explosion of the Devil Troop. The explosion of the Devil Troop was not only a devil's eye, but also the holy punishment of void absorbed by the devil eye. Such an explosion was equivalent to a head-on attack from a murderous weapon. Situt Sangyue's injury was destined to take a long time to recover. As for Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, Li Tianlan's expression was a little complicated. The brother-in-law who threw the Dark Saint spear to him at the most critical moment of the battle and finally protected him was still in a coma. He was the strongest among them, but he was also the most seriously injured. When he woke up, not only would he need a long time to recuperate, but it would also depend on his luck whether he could recover his strength. If he was unlucky, even if Raphael was alive without the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, it would be an extremely heavy loss for the Dark Knights. Li Tianlan shook his head, suddenly stood up and said, "I'm going out for a walk." He got up and left the room. Opposite the robbery ward was a temporarily modified intensive care unit. At this moment, Raphael was lying inside, motionless. Li Tianlan stood by the window of the ward and looked at the motionless figure. After a long silence, he turned around and walked into another ward. "When I was a child. I don't remember." Dongqing Rushi's clear and melodious voice rang out in the ward. Li Tianlan walked in and looked at Situt Sangyue sitting on the bed. He nodded and said, "Auntie." The complexity in Situt Sangyue's eyes flashed away. Then she nodded and said with a smile, "How's the situation outside?" "It's fine." Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He subconsciously avoided Situt Sangyue's gaze and whispered, "We won." "Yes, we won." Situt Sangyue muttered to herself and said softly, "It's good that we won." Dongqing Rushi stood up happily and pulled Li Tianlan to sit down beside her. The charm in her eyes and eyebrows was natural. Li Tianlan smiled and touched her hair. Dongqing Rushi relaxed and her eyes became clearer and brighter. Situt Sangyue also fell silent. No one knew whether it was intentional or not. Whether it was tribulation, Situ Tsangyue Li Tianlan, or even the entire Jianghu state, they all avoided a question. Jianghu state won the battle on trial day. Because of Li Tianlan's desperate comeback, because Li Tianlan had the sword energy of the peak of the invincible realm at that moment. But from beginning to end, no one asked Li Tianlan where the sword energy came from. Li Tianlan didn't say it either. He gently stroked Dongqing Rushi's hair and looked at her face with complicated eyes. Situ Tsangyue was also looking at Li Tianlan, and her eyes were equally complicated. At the same time, at International Airport, a special plane from Jianghu State landed slowly. Reki City had been in constant turmoil in recent days. After trial day, major airlines finally made up their minds and temporarily suspended flights to Im. Now the route situation was chaotic. To be on the safe side, the special plane of Jiang Shangyu, the new vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps of Jianghu State, would land at International Airport, and he would be accompanied to Reki City by Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Arctic Ocean Command. People came and went at Airport. Cheng Huaining, with a few guards, stood in the crowd in casual clothes, and his smile looked a little fake. Obviously, he did not welcome Jiang Shangyu to Eastern Europe. The entire Snowdance Corps would not welcome him either. But this was the decision of Jianghu State. Even if he was reluctant, Cheng Huaining still had to go through the necessary procedures. The cabin door opened. Jiang Shangyu, who was also in casual clothes and carrying a backpack, appeared in front of the cabin door. His smile was gentle and calm, and his entire body did not have the slightest bit of aura. Coupled with his attire and extremely young face, he looked like a traveler from afar, not a soldier. Cheng Huaining was stunned for a moment, and then he waved his hand. When Jiang Shangyu saw Cheng Huaining, he was stunned. It seemed that he did not expect that Cheng Huaining would come to greet him in person. Then he quickened his pace and walked down the gangway. As soon as his feet landed, he was at least 10 meters away from Cheng Huaining. He had already reached out his hand with a smile on his face. Cheng Huaining moved forward a little. Without the slightest sign, a great force came directly from behind. The great force instantly pressed Cheng Huaining to the ground. However, the hurried roar in his ears sounded at this time. "General, be careful." A sharp sword light almost flew over Cheng Huaining's head and pierced Jiang Shangyu. The extremely condensed sword intent suddenly broke out in front of Jiang Shangyu. The space was completely shattered by this sword and it was blurry. Jiang Shangyu's smile was a little stiff. Boom. In an instant, the completely broken sword intent completely enveloped Jiang Shangyu. Countless sword energy flew wildly in the airport and destroyed the fighter plane in an instant. Cheng Huaining and several guards were instantly seriously injured. Cheng Huaining's mind was blank. This sudden sword was completely aimed at Jiang Shangyu. The most important thing was that this sword was the real invincible strike. The sword light broke out for a moment. Blood splattered and then dissipated. The airport was in chaos. Cheng Huaining, whose face was livid, stood up and looked in the direction of Jiang Shangyu. Only a backpack was still there, and Jiang Shangyu, whom he was going to greet, had disappeared. Puff. A mouthful of blood sprayed directly from Cheng Huaining's mouth. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on August 20th in Eastern Europe. Before it was dark, 2 pieces of news swept through the entire dark world like a hurricane. Withdraw. Before the president of Jianghu State visited Reki City. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was the first to announce its withdrawal from Reki City. In less than 5 minutes, the Vatican also announced the withdrawal of all forces in Reki City. Along with this news, Jiang Shangyu, the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps of Jianghu State, was attacked by an invincible realm expert as soon as he arrived in Im and was now missing. Chapter 543. The retreat of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was not mighty. As a new superpower in the dark world, with most of the dominators of other forces dead or seriously injured, the Purgatory of Heaven capital could be regarded as the real best in the entire dark world because of the existence of God. No one would have thought that when all the major forces had invested heavily in Reki City, the first breakthrough in the chaos in Eastern Europe, only 3 people from the Purgatory of Heaven capital had come. 3 people came. Naturally, there were 3 of them when they left. God, Daybreak, Dawn. One was at the peak of the invincible realm, one was at the invincible realm, and one was at the half-step invincible realm. Although the number of people was small, the lineup could be said to be extremely luxurious. The biggest advantage of having a small number of people was that it was convenient for them to retreat and move covertly. So many major events had happened in Reki City, but except for the night of the trial day, no one could detect the existence of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The biggest disadvantage of a small number of people was that without enough support, it was difficult for the Purgatory of Heaven capital to make any big moves in Reki City. So the Purgatory of Heaven capital came. So the Purgatory of Heaven capital left. He came and went in a hurry like a passerby. The small private plane gradually took off, and Reki City in his sight was gradually becoming smaller. Looking down from top to bottom, this capital of Wulan State used to be extremely prosperous and lively. Perhaps because of the constant storms in recent days, all the streets had become extremely cold. According to official statistics, after the date of death, at least 1/3 of the shopping malls in Reki City were closed, and the number of people in Reki City was reduced by nearly 3/5 in one day. Not everyone had the courage to leave this land permanently, but there were many people who chose to leave temporarily. After the trial day, more people left and more shops closed. The streets and alleys were desolate. Occasionally some people passed by, but they were all in a hurry. Although the dark world could be sure that there would be no war in Reki City, the dark clouds of war still did not dissipate. Therefore the tall buildings were still tall buildings, but at this moment they looked extremely desolate. Daybreak sat by the window and looked at Reki City, which was getting smaller and smaller, in silence. His handsome face, which could be described as beautiful or devilish, did not have any extra expression, but his eyes were incomparably deep. Such a Reki City reminded him of Yuzhou City during the Spring Festival in Jianghu State. It was just as prosperous. It was the same cold silence. Cold, vast, desolate, but incomparably beautiful. Reki City was really beautiful. In the eyes of every big shot in the dark world, Reki City could be regarded as a peerless beauty that could drive people crazy. Daybreak watched quietly. The plane was rising. Clouds appeared in front of him, clear and faint, misty and indistinct. He subconsciously shook his head, and for the first time his eyes showed a little regret. What? Deity sat next to Daybreak and closed his eyes to rest. He seemed to feel the change in his mood and asked aloud. It's nothing. Daybreak shook his head, hesitated, and couldn't help but ask, Your Highness, are we really going to give up Reki City? The geographical location of Wulan State was too important. If this country could fall into the hands of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the future of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which occupied East Island in Wulan State, was almost unimaginable. Maybe in 10 or 20 years, it could completely recover its vitality and be on par with the Wang family of Beihai. Now it was so easy to let it go? How could he be willing? If you haven't fought for it, how is that considered giving up? Deity said calmly. Daybreak's expression became serious. Why don't we compete? Because it's not time yet. Deity said slowly. Daybreak raised his eyebrows and subconsciously rubbed a dark ring in his hand, as if he was thinking about something. The ring spun tightly against his finger like a small shadow. There seemed to be countless tiny runes flashing in the shadow, which looked delicate and strange. Are you waiting for this? Daybreak raised the ring on his hand. Deity opened his eyes and glanced at it. There was some regret in his eyes. I can't wait. This dark ring was the murderous weapon Shadow the Ripper, which belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Shadow the Ripper was not in the hands of Deity, but had always been in the hands of Daybreak. This alone showed how stable his position in the Purgatory of Heaven capital was. It had been nearly 4 years since the final battle of Heaven capital. Shadow the Ripper had also recovered some firepower, but it would take at least a year to reach the state of fire. The chaos in Eastern Europe could not be delayed until then. But it doesn't matter much if there is one less murderous weapon. To put it bluntly, Reki City is just a breakthrough in the chaos. Li Tianlan took down Wulan State, and his credit is naturally greater than the sky. Now it seems that he has defended it. But the trial day just eliminates some forces that can't go to the end. The situation in the whole of Eastern Europe now seems clear. Who can say what the situation will be in the end? Deity said calmly, let me give you an example. For example, if Li Tianlan dies today, who will Reki City belong to now? How is this possible? Daybreak shook his head subconsciously. I heard that President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State will visit Wulan State in the near future. If everything is settled, Li Tianlan should return to Zhongzhou State with President Li Huaqing. Then, there is no next. Deity said meaningfully, it's certain that Li Tianlan wants to go back. But do you really think he can leave? Daybreak's eyes narrowed. Deity turned to look out of the window and whispered, the final battle hasn't begun yet. who can leave unscathed until the end. The sound of light footsteps rang out. Dawn, who looked 70% to 80% similar to Daybreak, walked over quickly and said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, I just received news that Jianghu, Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps, was attacked as soon as he entered IM and is now missing." He handed over the handheld computer in his hand, which was playing the news of IM International Airport. Deity laughed. He glanced at Daybreak and said blandly, "Look, I told you that he can't leave now." He looked down at the handheld computer quietly. On the computer screen, the picture of IM International Airport was playing. Deity watched it twice from beginning to end, then shook his head with a chuckle. "He's a smart man. From now on, I'm afraid that he will really open up the sky." "You mean Jiang Shanyu?" Daybreak asked. Deity nodded and said in a calm and affirmative tone, "This man is extraordinary." Daybreak looked at the picture seriously. After a long time he said slowly, "Self-directed and self-acted? Who knows?" Deity shook his head. "This is not the problem we should care about now. It's the Snowdance Corps that should have a headache." Daybreak took the handheld computer and looked at it again. He asked casually, "Where are we going now?" "Now?" Deity narrowed his eyes. At this moment he thought of a lot of things. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was a superpower that had early warning of the chaos in Eastern Europe. As early as more than 3 years ago, before the final battle of East Island began, he had been prepared for today's situation. The Samsara Palace did not let him down and developed the situation to the present point. Now the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Samsara Palace still had cooperation. And he also had cooperation with the mysterious His Majesty. Who did the Samsara Palace and the mysterious His Majesty cooperate with? What about the Wang family of Beihai? With the withdrawal of the superpowers, the general trend of the entire dark world had now completely gathered on these few superpowers. Everything was coming to an end. A video communication flashed on the screen of the handheld computer. Daybreak returned the computer to Deity, coughed dryly and said with a smile, "It's Phoenix." Deity shook his head and did not take it. "Your Highness, where are we going?" Dawn asked the same question as Daybreak. Deity was silent. After a long time he slowly said, "Go to Mormons." Everything would erupt in the northernmost city of the Snow Empire that was enveloped by the polar night. It was nearing the end and there had to be an end. Chapter 544. Li Tianlan received 2 pieces of news in the car on his way back. When the phone rang, Li Tianlan was sitting in the car with Dongqing Rushi in his arms, looking out of the window. It was windy and rainy in Reki City. But perhaps because he was about to leave, the wind and rain in the empty city made Li Tianlan feel exquisite and good. Then 2 pieces of news came one after another. The Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican officially withdrew from Reki City. Before he could feel the surprise, the news that Jiang Shanyu had been attacked and disappeared in IM reached his ears. The 2 pieces of news arrived almost at the same time. It was not a great sorrow or joy, but the difference in mood was still very clear. Even Li Tianlan was stunned for a while with the phone in his hand. "What's wrong?" Dongqing Rushi's voice was lazy and soft. After the most intimate relationship, she gradually let go of some insignificant reservations. She leaned in Li Tianlan's arms, arched her little head and looked very happy. "The Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican have withdrawn," Li Tianlan said. He paused and continued, "They have withdrawn from Reki City." The intelligence showed that the 2 forces had indeed left Reki City, but they had not shown any intention of leaving Eastern Europe for the time being. Obviously, even if the 2 forces gave up Wulan State, they still did not want to give up Eastern Europe. In theory, Eastern Europe was too big for any force to monopolize. Now, there were only a few forces qualified to share the cake in Eastern Europe. Snowdance Corps, the Wang family of Beihai, the Vatican, the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Other forces had been eliminated, and only 4 forces were left to divide up Eastern Europe. As long as they operated patiently, there would be gains. At this time, they suddenly gave up Wulan State, which had already been settled. There was no doubt that they wanted to find a new breakthrough. The 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan State could be said to represent 1/3 of the interests of Eastern Europe. Wang Qianzong said that he wanted to take down all of Eastern Europe. At present, the possibility was very small. But if he broke through, it would not be a big problem to take down Snow Country, which was also 1/3 of the interests. For the remaining 1/3, would the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican fight or make peace? Or would they play a game for Jianghu state before fighting for the one-third? Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead and suddenly felt that the whole thing had become complicated again. This is a good thing. Dongqing Rushi thought for a while and said seriously. For now it doesn't look too bad. Li Tianlan shook his head. But when the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican withdrew from Eastern Europe, Jiang Shangyu, who had just arrived in Im, was attacked and disappeared. This news was extremely sudden to everyone. Dongqing Rushi was also stunned. Now in the whole dark world, Jiang Shangyu could be said to be a young expert second only to Li Tianlan, with the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. The new vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps. He had just arrived in Eastern Europe when he suddenly disappeared. Missing after being attacked. Was he caught? Or did he escape? Dongqing Rushi frowned and said hesitantly, did the Purgatory of Heaven capital or the Vatican do it? I won't. Li Tianlan shook his head with certainty. They don't have to do that. Jiang Shangyu alone can't affect the overall situation at present. For Jianghu state, it's a brainless provocation. If they are not satisfied with what Eastern Europe has gained in this chaos, they should target me, not Jiang Shangyu, who has not been in touch with the specific affairs of the Snowdance Corps. But if it wasn't them, who else would do it? Dongqing Rushi murmured to herself in confusion. No, it should be said that if it wasn't them, who else could do it? Li Tianlan said calmly. Dongqing Rushi froze for a moment. The situation in all of Eastern Europe, which was extremely clear but seemed to be shrouded in a layer of gauze, suddenly became clear at this moment with Li Tianlan's words. The chaos in Eastern Europe could be said to be the chaos that the Dark World had not seen in nearly 100 years. After the date of death and the trial day, the divine and holy lists had been fragmented. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu had not yet entered the Invincible Realm. But the problem was that there were not many Invincible Realm experts in the Dark World now. For the current Dark World, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu were the top combat capability. They attacked Jiang Shangyu in an instant and made him disappear. At present, only the Vatican and the Purgatory of Heaven capital had this kind of strength. If it wasn't them, who else could do it? Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. His face suddenly became a little ugly. From the looks of it so far. Dongqing Rushi's voice was clear and calm. You are the most suspicious. Li Tianlan obviously thought of this. He smiled bitterly and did not speak. Jiang Shangyu was related to the general trend, but it was not important, at least not now. So the Vatican and the Purgatory of Heaven capital would not focus on him. And Wang Tianzong was now imprisoned in the ruins of the office of the president, so it was impossible for him to take action. Now in the land of Eastern Europe, only Li Tianlan was the most suspicious person to attack Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu was not important to the general trend of the Dark World, but for the general trend of Jianghu state and the Snowdance Corps he was crucial. Li Tianlan had always been strong. He dared to kill Qin Qingwan in front of Wang Tianzong. Naturally, he dared to attack Jiang Shangyu as soon as he arrived in Eastern Europe. This was the most likely speculation. As for whether there were any experts around Li Tianlan who could capture or even kill Jiang Shangyu in an instant, Li Tianlan's heart gradually sank. He knew that there were still such experts and they would be on his side. The key was that he didn't know how many people in the outside world knew about this. The master of Samsara Palace was still alive. This was not a simple rumor. If the high-level officials of Jianghu state knew this news, combined with Jiang Shangyu's disappearance, it was enough to make them think too much. Let's not talk about the master of Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting, the patriarch of the Lin clan, was still free. Li Tianlan didn't care what the outside world thought, but he cared about the attitude of the core of Jianghu state. Once they also thought that he had attacked Jiang Shangyu, it was tantamount to violating the rules. To put it bluntly, he had stepped on the line. At such a sensitive moment, stepping on the line naturally had to pay the price. A great price. Li Tianlan silently took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. Your Highness, this is Riker. The phone was quickly connected, and the voice of Prime Minister Riker of Wulan State sounded. Have you heard about Vice Marshal Jiang Shangyu? Li Tianlan asked directly. I've already got the news. Riker's voice was a little strange, as if he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. Even Riker's tone had changed. It could be imagined how strong the outside world's suspicion of him was now. You contact Im in the name of Wulan State. In addition, the Arctic Ocean Command will fully cooperate with your actions to find him. In any case, you must find Vice Marshal Jiang in the shortest time. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. All right, I'll arrange it right away. Seeing that Li Tianlan had no other instructions, Rieker hung up the phone. Li Tianlan put down the phone, and his face had completely calmed down. The Snowdance Corps was the biggest winner so far in the chaos in Eastern Europe, but the new vice-marshal was attacked and disappeared when he just arrived in Eastern Europe. This was simply a joke, and it would make many people in Jianghu state question his ability to control Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan didn't care about these things. But the most important thing was that this was a black pot prepared for him and he was pinned in Eastern Europe. If Jiang Shangyu did not appear as the commander of the Snowdance Corps, he naturally could not leave Eastern Europe. Chapter 545. The army headquarters building of Jianghu State was solemn and majestic, quiet and solemn. There were no so-called flowers and leaves here. The square, the building and the star flag were almost eternal symbols. At first glance, the entire army headquarters building was clearly visible. It stood in the city of Yuzhou with an extremely calm and domineering air. Most of the time the army headquarters building was quiet. In this building, which was filled with the smell of iron and blood, everyone walked in a hurry. No one would make a loud noise. It seemed that everyone was in awe of something from the bottom of their hearts. But at this moment, there was a loud and angry roar in the executive minister's office on the top floor of the army headquarters building. The loud but weak voice came out of the office and spread throughout the entire floor, making the ears of some ordinary secretaries buzz. What does Li Tianlan want to do? Does he take the army headquarters in Kunlun City seriously? Does he take the overall situation seriously? Does he take Jianghu State seriously? He is the commander of the Snowdance Corps, but it doesn't mean that the Snowdance Corps is Li Tianlan's independent kingdom. Does he want to have troops in Eastern Europe? He's still too young. In Dongqing Wudi's office, Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Jianghu State, almost slapped the table to vent his emotions. His eyes were red and he was in an extremely irritable state, almost crazy. Gu Qianchuan was seriously injured. Gu Xingyun himself was seriously injured. Kunlun City, which had temporarily lost 2 invincible realm experts, was unprecedentedly weak. Although Jiang Shangyu had fallen out with Kunlun City, his position was personally appointed by Kunlun City after all. As a result, as soon as he arrived in Eastern Europe, Jiang Shangyu was attacked. He had been missing for more than 24 hours and there was still no news. In today's dark world, Li Tianlan was naturally the one who could and was the most suspicious of doing this. As long as something happened to Jiang Shangyu in Eastern Europe, as the commander of the Snowdance Corps, Li Tianlan would be responsible. In Gu Xingyun's view, this was exactly what Li Tianlan wanted. If Jiang Shangyu could not be found, Li Tianlan could naturally stay in Eastern Europe and run Wulan State. It might be a little harsh to say that he had troops for himself, but in Gu Xingyun's eyes, Li Tianlan had completely exposed his ambition to use Eastern Europe and Jianghu State to play with Gu Xingyun. Jiang Shangyu's falling out with Kunlun City had already made Gu Xingyun lose face. As a result, as soon as he arrived in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan took action without any buffer. This was completely equivalent to not taking Kunlun City in his eyes at all. It was even equivalent to a hard kick in Gu Xingyun's face. How could Gu Xingyun endure it? Most importantly, the word missing was enough to stimulate his nerves. 2 days ago, Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City, went to Beijing to pick up Gu Fenghua. As a result, he was severely injured by Qin Weibai with a mysterious power and fled. Until today, Gu Qianchuan had not come back and there was no news. Not only Jiang Shangyu but Gu Qianchuan was also missing. What was worse was that Jiang Shan, the councillor of Beijing province, reported the news to Kunlun City unhurriedly nearly 20 hours after the incident. Jiang family Li Tianlan, this year's graduate Qin Weibai. More and more people did not take Kunlun City seriously. After the maneuver of the 2 academies, Gu Xingyun was surprised to find that the status of Kunlun City had begun to decline at a stunning speed. All the negative emotions in his heart broke out completely after the news of Jiang Shangyu's disappearance came, so that he directly rushed into Dongqing Wudi's office and roared regardless of anything. Gu Xingyun's voice was like thunder. After his hysterical outburst, he put his hands on the table, and his heavy breathing was extremely harsh. When his mood gradually calmed down, Dongqing Wudi smiled and poured a cup of tea for Gu Xingyun. He said calmly, "Your Highness, at present, no one can confirm that the disappearance of Vice Marshal Jiang Shangyu is related to Tianlan. You don't have to be excited. Do you think this matter should be investigated?" Gu Xingyun was stunned. Looking at the smile on Dongqing Wudi's face, he suddenly realized that there was something wrong with his mentality. In his life he wanted to strengthen Kunlun City and the special warfare system of Jianghu State, instead of taking the elite route like the Li family before. He did a good job, but it was obviously impossible to develop a comprehensive system to compete with the army headquarters in just 20 years. Therefore, on many sensitive personnel matters, Kunlun City must reach an agreement with the army headquarters. When the former minister Qi Baitsong took office again, Gu Xingyun and Qi Baitsong had the same position. They cooperated happily and the special warfare group also flourished. But now the minister of the army headquarters was Dongqing Wudi. If they wanted to reach an agreement, they needed compromise and balance. Moreover, he knew what would happen if he mentioned Li Tianlan's problem in front of Dongqing Wudi. Gu Xingyun's face was cloudy, and he began to be lost in thought for a while. Recently he was really physically and mentally exhausted. The great pressure and a series of bad news almost made him lose control of his emotions. Compared with Dongqing Wudi, who was also under the same pressure but still calm, Gu Xingyun finally realized that he was still impetuous. He slowly sat opposite Dongqing Wudi, picked up the teacup and took a sip without saying a word. Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun quietly. Among the top figures with high status and power in Jianghu State, he and Gu Xingyun were now the two most dangerous and under the most pressure. Kunlun City now seemed to have no loss of strength, but for the time being, it had no peak combat capability, which made it passive everywhere. Once its reputation declined, its actual interest would inevitably shrink. After the end of the maneuver of the two academies, it could be seen from the final choices of those elite students. In this final maneuver of the two academies, Kunlun City lost a considerable part of its future. Dongqing Wudi was also having a hard time now. The trial day broke out in Eastern Europe, and the night in Yuzhou was also turbulent. The influence of the private transfer of troops was breaking out at an appalling speed and getting worse. One of his trusted deputy commanders in the garrison corps had been put in prison. The Air Force headquarters was in turmoil. In the Navy, the resignation of a deputy commander at the level of colonel of the fleet was the fuse. Now the fire was getting bigger and bigger. In various theaters of operations in recent days, several generals had expressed on different occasions that they clearly drew a line with Dongqing Wudi. And these generals used to be considered Dongqing Wudi's direct subordinates. Within the Border Control Corps, the game between Jianghu and several commanders was also intensifying. Even within the giant group, there were voices against Dongqing Wudi. Compared with Gu Xingyun, who was in decline but still irreplaceable for the time being, how long Dongqing Wudi could hold the position of the standing minister of the army headquarters had become the concern of the whole Jianghu state. Dongqing Wudi didn't worry much. Although he was under a lot of pressure, he was much calmer than Gu Xingyun. This time he knew very well that whether he would fall or not, this was the beginning of the decline of Kunlun City, because of the rise of Li Tianlan. As for the Dongqing clan and himself, even if he was really forced to resign this time, the future of the Dongqing clan would still be infinitely bright. This was also because of the rise of Li Tianlan. No matter what would happen in the future, he would regard it as the last part of his political career. On this road, Dongqing Wudi relaxed and was fearless of everything. Only this relaxed and presumptuous mentality could make him the real god of massacre of Jianghu state. If God stood in his way, he would kill God. If Buddha stood in his way, he would kill Buddha. The delicate silence was finally broken. Gu Xingyun put down the teacup and said in a low voice, "Anyway, Li Tianlan is responsible. Jiang Shangyu just arrived in Eastern Europe, and Li Tianlan didn't play any role. I don't see his responsibility." Dongqing Wudi was still smiling and he said calmly, "I can only see Tianlan's contribution to Jianghu state. Your Highness, you know what this means. It's no exaggeration to say that in the whole of Eastern Europe, as long as we take down the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, Jianghu state can even give up Snow Country. Although the 5 countries in Eastern Europe are not big, they are important cornerstones for Jianghu state to completely establish its position as the world's hegemon. It's no exaggeration to describe Tianlan's contribution. As for Jiang Shangyu, he was attacked in Im, and he didn't even arrive at the station of the Snowdance Corps. In order to protect him, Commander Cheng Huaining of the Arctic Ocean Command was also seriously injured. Without prior preparation, Jiang Shangyu's disappearance was completely an accident. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, "And even if he disappeared inside the Snowdance Corps, what does it mean? Tianlan led the army north to expand the territory on behalf of Jianghu state, not to be a nanny. If Jiang Shangyu was really so important, why did he send him to Eastern Europe in the first place?" Gu Xingyun's face changed slightly. This was tantamount to directly transferring the contradiction to Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun avoided Dongqing Wudi's gaze and said, "Minister, do you mean that, as the marshal of the Snowdance Corps, Li Tianlan has no responsibility for Jiang Shangyu's disappearance? He has the credit. Merit is merit and fault is fault. If the two can be confused, then many things will be difficult to deal with. Well, he has the credit. No one denies what he did in Eastern Europe, but Li Tianlan's temper is too strong and overbearing. Even if we don't talk about Jiang Shangyu, it's against the rules for him to kill Qin Qingwan. Even if Qin Qingwan violated the military order, it didn't affect the overall situation. Why kill him? If what he did in Eastern Europe is not dealt with, I think many comrades will have something to say." "Yes, he has the credit." Gu Xingyun opened his mouth and looked at Dongqing Wudi. For a moment he didn't know what to say. He didn't care about Jiang Shangyu this time. Since Jiang Shangyu had completely fallen out with him, in his opinion, it was better for him to die. All the venting today was about Jiang Shangyu, but all the targets were Li Tianlan. He thought that Li Tianlan wanted to stay in Eastern Europe to run Wulan State at all costs. Such wild ambition had touched the bottom line of Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun was even a little afraid. He had not recovered from his injury. After a long time, 3 years, 5 years, if Li Tianlan, who developed unscrupulously in Eastern Europe, returned to Zhongzhou State again, who could control him? Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth and suddenly said, "Minister, there are some things that can't be ignored. I still suggest that Li Tianlan be transferred back to Zhongzhou State immediately. It's better to let others deal with the affairs in Eastern Europe." What he said was straightforward and clear. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and said with the same smile, "What's the reason? Like father, like son. Everyone knows what his father is like. Now Li Tianlan is in charge of a large number of troops. Bullshit." Dongqing Wudi, who had been smiling, suddenly put on a cold face and directly swore. He looked at the stunned Gu Xingyun and said expressionlessly, "Like father, like son? Are you even qualified to comment on his father?" Gu Xingyun was stunned for a moment and suddenly became angry out of shame. "What do you mean? Don't tell me I can't evaluate one. You just can't evaluate it." Dongqing Wudi said with cold eyes, "Like father, like son? Very good. If that's the case, it's best to let Tianlan take charge of the army." Gu Xingyun stood up and pointed at Dongqing Wudi, his fingertips trembling slightly. "You are simply unreasonable." Dongqing Wudi waved his hand and said in a cold voice, "See the guest out." Chapter 546. The midsummer in Mormons was still as cold as winter. It rained in the cold winter. The endless rain seemed to drift from Reki City to the northernmost part of snow country. It was not hurried, but the rain mixed with some broken ice hit people's faces and made them feel painful. Mormons in the rain was an extremely sharp city. The everlasting night remained unchanged. It rained between heaven and earth, and it was as sharp as a sword. When Deity got off the plane, the night in Mormons was dark and hazy. He looked down at the time on his watch. In a trance he couldn't tell whether it was day or night. Wisps of white air rose with his breath. At this time, it was the warmest season in Mormons. He reached out his hand and shook it casually. Feeling the cold rain between his fingers, he was silent for a long time. A black off-road vehicle was parked not far in front of the plane. As soon as Deity got off the plane, the door of the off-road vehicle had been opened. A middle-aged man less than 50 years old walked over quickly. The middle-aged man's appearance was not outstanding, but his every move was unusually calm. He was the kind of person who could make people feel at ease at first glance. Deity glanced at him and his eyes softened quietly. He smiled and waved at him. The middle-aged man paused and glanced at Daybreak. His eyes were a little cold. Then he walked up to Deity and said expressionlessly, "Where are you going, Your Highness?" This attitude was definitely not good. But Deity didn't mind at all. He just smiled kindly and said, "Have you had dinner? Do you want to have a bite nearby?" "No need." The middle-aged man said blandly, "Where are you going?" "Tianyin, watch your attitude." Daybreak finally couldn't bear it anymore. "Don't forget who is standing in front of you." Attitude. The middle-aged man's voice was cold. He seemed to be responding to Daybreak, but his eyes were looking straight into Deity's eyes. He was sharp and direct. "What attitude do you want?" Daybreak's eyes darkened and he was faintly angry. Deity suddenly waved his hand. "Well, we're on the same side. What's the point of quarreling as soon as we meet?" I'm not talking to him. Tianyin looked at Deity calmly. Your Highness, what attitude do you want? Dawn and Daybreak's faces changed. They looked at Deity and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Deity fell silent. The atmosphere in the heavy rain suddenly became a little depressing. Your Highness, Tianyin isn't. The anger in Daybreak's eyes suddenly subsided, and he pleaded for Tianyin. Deity waved his hand. He looked into Tianyin's eyes and said softly, What I want is your attitude. My attitude is very clear. Tianyin's tone was calm. Deity took a deep look at him, walked past him and got into the off-road vehicle. Tianyin stood there, bathed in the rain, his eyes clear and stubborn. What are you doing? Daybreak winked at Dawn, asking him to follow Deity. Then he walked up to Tianyin and questioned him in a low voice. Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Tianyin. The three masters under the god of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were Daybreak, Dawn, and Phoenix, who respectively controlled the most elite and terrifying Senluo, life-prolonging, and Athanasi halls in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. However, the code name Tianyin was not ordinary. In the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, being able to use the word Tian as a code name had an extraordinary meaning. Tianyin was the deputy captain of the Athanasia Hall. He was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and was also Phoenix's most important assistant. This position was very high in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, but it was still far from deities. But the problem was that inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, there were too many stories about their own positions. How could a simple position determine the hierarchy? The relationship between Tianyin and deity was no less than that between Daybreak and deity. But even so, he still thought that Tianyin's performance was a bit excessive this time. Secretly competing with his highness and confronting deity were two completely different concepts. Nothing. Tianyin said expressionlessly. Nothing. Why are you crazy? Daybreak sneered. Tianyin looked at the falling rain in the night. After a long time he said faintly, The rain is too heavy. I don't like it. He turned around and walked to the off-road vehicle. Daybreak looked at his back quietly. Tianyin's back was straight, but he felt a trace of loneliness from this straightness. Daybreak was a little annoyed and lost in thought. Loneliness. He had never thought that Tianyin would feel lonely among them. This was a real brother who had saved him, Daybreak, and even deity. He was also a brother who had been saved by him and deity. On the battlefield they could trust each other with all their lives. He would be lonely. What? Daybreak shook his head hard and walked to the off-road vehicle. The rain in Mormons was too heavy, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was too big. In the vast Purgatory of Heaven Capital, he suddenly wanted to know who else would feel lonely. The off-road vehicle turned around and left in the increasingly messy heavy rain. Tianyin was silent as he drove. Did we get anything in Mormons? Deity broke the silence and suddenly asked. No. Tianyin shook his head. He was a little serious but his tone was still a little bland. The Samsara Palace left almost no traces here. We have checked in all fields but there is no trace of the Samsara Palace. After the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, I investigated some members of the Polar Ground Alliance and found a lot of things. There are a total of 22 four-star deacons who may be from the Samsara Palace, but it is only a possibility. According to our analysis, the lowest possibility is less than 5%, and the highest possibility is only 17%. Again, we haven't found any evidence at present. Deity did not speak. But the corners of Daybreak's eyes twitched, and they looked at each other. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, it was the largest and only superpower in Eastern Europe. In this behemoth spanning many countries in Eastern Europe, deacons were the real main force. The highest level of deacons was 5-star, and above them were the members of the alliance. It was no exaggeration to say that any 4-star deacon was a respected middle-level or high-level figure in the Polar Ground Alliance. How many 4-star deacons were there in the entire Polar Ground Alliance? How many could they put down in Snow Country? If the Samsara Palace really had the ability to control 22 4-star deacons, it meant that they had monopolized nearly 1/5 of the Polar Ground Alliance's right to speak. This was simply a fantasy. They really hid it well. Deity whispered to himself. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital had started to make arrangements in Mormons more than 3 years ago. The earliest time was even before the final Battle of East Island. At that time, Jianghu State was still plotting against East Island. The master of Samsara Palace had just made an appointment to fight Gu Xingyun, and Daybreak had the first talk with Qin Weibai. In the end, There was the overall situation of the cooperation between the Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Qin Weibai did not hide anything. With East Island as the beginning and Eastern Europe as the end, the whole orderly but extremely complicated plan had been told to deity from that time. Mormons would be the end of everything, and it would also be the place of the final battle. Deity naturally had to plant the seeds in Mormons as soon as possible. And the first batch of people to be sent to Eastern Europe, of course, had to be the kind of people he absolutely trusted and would not have the slightest doubt. There were 80 such people. Tianyin was the leader of this group of people. That was why Tianyin missed the final battle of East Island. Half a year ago, Tianyin should have resigned from his post here and returned to East Island to enjoy his life. He did go back, but he came back here in less than 3 months. Now Tianyin was still in control here. Deity had the same trust in him. Let's go here. Deity took out a map and pointed out a place to Tianyin. The terrain of Mormons was complicated and so was the map. Tianyin glanced at it, then the off-road vehicle turned and began to speed up. It's the place where the urban area and the suburbs meet. There seems to be a manor. What else? Tianyin asked. That's the manor. Deity said with a smile. I made an appointment with Qin Weibai. This is the place she set. Tianyin said calmly, I'll investigate it carefully. Thank you. Deity looked at Tianyin for a while, then suddenly reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Tianyin did not stay silent, nor did he say any polite words. He just said calmly, Since it's been hard, when will your highness reward me? Tianyin. Daybreak's voice was cold. He really felt a little angry. Deity interrupted his anger and asked with a smile, What do you want? There's no need to be polite between us. As expected, Tianyin did not stand on ceremony. He said lightly, Sanluo life-prolonging and Athanasi halls. Give me one. He glanced at Daybreak and Dawn. Daybreak and Dawn did not hesitate at all. They said in unison, I'll give you mine. Don't, I want Athanasi hall. Tianyin directly interrupted the two of them. Daybreak and Dawn looked at each other and saw the bitterness and helplessness in each other's eyes. Sanluo, Athanasi, and life-prolonging. The power of the 3 hall masters in the Purgatory of Heaven capital was second only to deity. If Tianyin wanted to take it, Daybreak and Dawn could give it to him, no matter if it was Sanluo Hall or the life-prolonging hall. At this stage of friendship, a little power was really nothing. But Tianyin did not want it. He just wanted Athanasi Hall. The master of Athanasi Hall was Phoenix. Daybreak looked at deity, coughed, and said, Tianyin, I promise you that the comprehensive combat capability of Sanluo Hall is definitely stronger than that of Athanasi Hall. How about I follow His Highness and you go to Sanluo Hall? Among the 3 giants of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Daybreak was the strongest. Sanluo Hall was naturally stronger than the other 2 halls. If Tianyin took over this position, he could be said to be the real number 2 figure in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Tianyin glanced at him. His eyes suddenly became a little mocking and mean. I take over Sanluo Hall? Do I have to do something if I take it? There are some things that you don't have to do. I'm embarrassed. I want to be shameless. Besides, I don't want those brothers who died early to poke at my back. Daybreak's face changed slightly. He smiled bitterly and said nothing. Well, why don't you take over my... Shut up. Tianyin glanced at Dawn and said directly. Dawn shrugged his shoulders and stopped talking as expected. Tianyin just looked at deity and said calmly, Your Highness, will you give it to me or not? Daybreak sighed softly and finally kept silent. Tianyin's seniority was extremely high. Even in the Undying Palace, the Phoenix was still very polite and respectful to him, treating him as a big brother. Previously he did not know how the Phoenix offended Tianyin, but now he understood. The one who offended Tianyin was not the Phoenix but His Highness. If I don't give it to you, what will you do? Deity suddenly asked. His eyes were still soft as he looked at Tianyin. What will you do? Tianyin was silent for a while and laughed at himself. What can I do? If your Highness is reluctant, just let me leave the Purgatory of Heaven capital and go home. Go home? Deity whispered, Lin En? No, go to Tianan. Tianyin whispered and his eyes softened. I miss the young master. Deity was his master. But he had the young master. There was only one. There was only one. This was the biggest difference. Deity was silent. After a long time he said slowly, Why? There were many meanings in this question, but there was no emotion, not at all. Deity was calm, without sadness or joy. Tianyin was silent for a long time before he slowly asked, "Because you can't imagine what a child who has lived in despair and fear since he was a child is like. He desperately wants to hold on to everything, desperately wants to protect everything, but he has been powerless. He can't cry, he can't retreat, and he can't be weak. When he is tired, sleepy, tired, or in pain, he can only grit his teeth and keep silent. You don't understand these, so you won't think about the meaning of his existence." If he didn't understand, of course there was no meaning. Deity was in a daze and suddenly said, "He cried in front of me." "Yes, in front of you and only in front of you. Otherwise, who else can he be in front of? Only when he is in front of you, he feels that he is a child." Tianyin laughed mockingly and was extremely cold. "But I don't think he will think so now." Deity's heart ached for no reason and he was silent. The car moved slowly on the flat road in the wind and rain. The street lights on both sides were gradually receding. After going around and around for nearly an hour, when the off-road vehicle was about to leave the city, Deity finally saw the manor built between the darkness and the light. The off-road vehicle stopped at the gate of the manor. Two security guards in front of the door walked over quietly, looked at Deity and asked politely, "Who are you looking for?" Deity opened the door and got out of the car. He stood in front of the door and looked at the manor in the dark. The manor was hazy, as if it was shrouded in a faint white mist. The temperature was 0 degrees and it was raining all over the sky, but the inside of the manor was like heaven. There were clusters of flowers, green grass, and dense trees. In the huge manor, every corner was full of vitality. It was full of vitality. Deity looked at everything in the manor with a complicated look in his eyes. After a long time he slowly said, "Tell Qin Weibai that I am here." The wind and rain between heaven and earth suddenly quieted down. In an instant, the deep darkness seemed to completely solidify in an instant. Tianyin opened the door. Daybreak was ready to get out of the car. Dawn was going to speak. Deity was going to take a step. But everyone's movements froze in place in an instant. Deity's body tensed up, and he looked into the depths of the manor. A little darkness stretched out in his hand. In an instant, the ink in his hand had turned into a huge and ferocious black sickle. Before entering the door, Deity had already entered the fighting state. A wave of incomparably violent emotions suddenly filled the world. Anger, coldness, disgust, rejection, cruelty, excitement, countless emotions finally turned into the coldest killing intent, which directly spread throughout the entire manor. A little light appeared in front of Deity. It was colorful. The white clothes in his sight were flickering slightly. Every time she took a step, there was a colorful flowing light under her feet, which was dreamy and illusory. Qin Weibai's figure was erratic, and she finally appeared beside Deity. The killing intent between heaven and earth had completely condensed in one place, as if thunder would break out at any time. Qin Weibai's body was filled with colorful light, and she looked ethereal. Deity did not look at her, but stared at the nothingness behind her. After a long time he slowly said, "Is this the sword phoenix mentioned?" Qin Weibai nodded and said apologetically, "It has a bad temper and I can't control it." Deity smiled with a complicated meaning. Qin Weibai said calmly, "Your Highness, since you are here, why don't you go in and sit down and talk slowly? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.